So we're partnering with the Saudis and the Emiratis on this because the Trump administration doesn't want them partnering with anyone else, and we don't want to jeopardize our ability to bomb Yemen. Oh my God.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the 195th episode of this listener-supported podcast called Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And if you've never heard this podcast before, this podcast is my personal effort to understand what the hell the United States Congress is doing both with my money and in my name. I'm not a part of any political party. I'm not in any organizations. I'm not a part of any network. And I'm not doing this as part of some mission to push any ideology onto you. I just want to know what the hell is going on in my branch of the federal government. And I've been taking you along for the ride for 6.5 years and counting. And what a ride it has been. And something strange happened recently in this relatively new Congress, the 116th Congress. Something that I have never seen in 6.5 years of producing Congressional Dish, which is that a majority of Congress voted to scale back our involvement in a war. I'm speaking specifically of the war that's being waged in Yemen. Now, the Senate actually tried to do this, to my surprise, at the end of the last Congress in mid-December. I remember the day vividly. I was working on a different episode, and I stopped what I was doing, and I watched a good chunk of that debate live, because I couldn't believe it was happening. It was fascinating. But then that Congress died, along with the resolution that would have scaled back our involvement in the war, and I thought that was it. But then in March and April of this year, both the Senate and the House passed it again, and they put the resolution scaling back the Yemen war on President Trump's desk. And I gotta tell you, I didn't see that coming. And that's probably because, like most Americans, I haven't been paying much attention to Yemen. Not proud of it, but it's the truth. And I didn't know what we were doing there. You know, I knew that we were bombing Yemen and have been for a long time, mainly because the Obama administration drone bombed an American citizen and some of his family members. But the American citizen that he killed was Anwar al-Awlaki, who was part of Al-Qaeda in Yemen. But the part that bothered me so much about this is that this American citizen got no trial. He was not arrested. The Obama administration just murdered him from the sky with flying robots. And that was the first time that Yemen really popped up on my radar, and that was 2011, about a year before I started this podcast. But since then, I gotta be honest, I really haven't followed any of it very closely. But that's kind of changed for all of us recently, because since 2015, our partners in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have been waging a war on Yemen that just about everyone is now aware of, because so many people in Yemen are being starved and killed. It's become impossible to ignore, even for Congress. And so, in a move that I know is long overdue, I decided to finally try to understand what we've been doing in Yemen and why, in order to understand the debate that just took place in Congress. And I'm going to warn you, this episode isn't going to help you understand the internal dynamics of Yemen's politics all that much. You know, I went way deeper into Venezuela than I'm going to go into Yemen here today. Because what I really wanted to know was what our country is doing in Yemen. What do we want from Yemen? Why are we there at all? When did this start? And what changed to cause Congress, even the Republican-controlled Senate, to put a resolution limiting our role in Yemen on the president's desk? And as always, I expect you to take my word for none of this. On congressionaldish.com, in this episode's show notes, you can find all of my sources, including links to all of the hearings that I watched and the sound clips that I grabbed from news sources and other places. All of it is there for you. And when it comes to sound clips, I've included timestamps and transcripts so that you can find the unedited versions very easily and hear them all in context, because I created quite a few clip montages for this episode. But the thing is that I want you to be able to judge my edits. I'm trying as hard as I can to create a bullshit-free zone here on Congressional Dish. So use those show notes to start your own research or to fact-check anything you hear that sounds unbelievable. Because in this era of fake news, this is the standard for information we should be demanding of anyone who provides information to the public. And so I'm practicing what I preach. So please use it. And if you get value from it, please pay for it. because I don't allow any corporate sponsorship for the podcast or the website. Companies and advertisers already own the television stations and the radio stations and the newspapers and most magazines, and companies control, the entire world economy. And I'll be damned if I let them own all of podcasting too. And so if you support having a corporate-free zone in this world, even a teeny tiny one like this podcast, please help me stay independent of them by paying what you can using any of the options on the Support the Show page on congressionaldish.com. It's very much needed and very much appreciated. And so, let's get started with Yemen. So Yemen, as a united country, has really only been a thing since 1990 when the constantly warring North Yemen and South Yemen decided to merge after oil was discovered in the country. Starting at the beginning of the country in 1990, the president at the time, the first president, was Ali Abdullah Saleh. And remember that name, President Saleh, because you're going to be hearing it a lot today. Now, the reasons that the masters of the universe seem to give any shits about Yemen is because of Yemen's location. Yemen is located at the southern end of the landmass that Saudi Arabia sits on. It borders Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. And across the water, in Africa, Yemen is closest to Djibouti, which is where the U.S. has a big-ass military base called Camp Lemonnier, which is our only permanent base in all of Africa. That is used to, among other things, bomb the shit out of Yemen. Now, at one point, the land sticks out from the Yemen coastline, and at that point, Djibouti and Yemen are only 12 miles apart. And so just the fact that Yemen is located anywhere near that base with 4,000 Americans living on it is a major reason that the United States cares who governs in Yemen. But that strait between Djibouti and Yemen, which is called the Babel Mundob Strait, which translates to Gate of Tears, well, it is super important for the thing that the warmongers care about the most, which is the ability of multinational companies, specifically multinational fossil fuel companies, to make money. And this is because the Gate of Tears, the Bab el-Mandab Strait, is a great place to control if you want to stop Saudi Arabia from being able to ship a lot of their oil. Because the only other way for the Saudis to get their oil to market is by shipping it around the southern tip of Africa, which adds thousands of miles to the trips, which obviously would cost the Saudis and the companies and countries they partner with a lot of money. Here's former Representative Ileana Ros-Lehtinen in a 2015 hearing that she chaired about Yemen.
Iran has reportedly dispatched a naval destroyer near Yemen in a game of chicken over one of the most important shipping routes in the Gulf of Aden. This area is a gateway between Europe and the Middle East, and Iran must not be allowed to escalate any tensions nor attempt to disrupt the shipping lanes.
Can't disrupt those shipping lanes. And on top of having shipping lanes, Yemen also has human beings, a lot of whom have been labeled as terrorists. Now, some of these humans have been labeled as part of AQAP, which is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And also some of these humans have been labeled as part of ISIS or ISIL or whatever we're calling them these days. We're told that the boogeymen who want to kill us all are all over Yemen. And since the 2001 authorization for the use of military force was signed right after 9/11, our country has bombed and killed who knows how many people. People labeled terrorists or militants or rebels, but who were, in fact, definitely people who definitely were never afforded a day in court. In fact, Yemen was one of the first countries targeted in the war on terror. Bombs fell on Yemen even before Iraq. Because the George W. Bush administration started bombing Yemen in late 2002 after a bombing that certainly never made it onto my radar. On October 6, 2002, a suicide bomber on a tiny boat crashed into the side of an oil tanker off the coast of Yemen. The tanker caught fire and spilled 90,000 barrels of oil into the Gulf of Aden. The attack killed one crew member, injured 12 others, and caused $45 million in damages to the oil tanker. Osama bin Laden, the member of the Saudi royal family who allegedly planned 9/11, issued a statement on behalf of Al-Qaeda and posted it on jihad.net, which I always thought was a joke, but apparently was a real thing. But Al-Qaeda and bin Laden claimed responsibility for the oil tanker attack by saying, quote, "By exploding the oil tanker in Yemen, the holy warriors hit the umbilical cord and lifeline of the crusader community, reminding the enemy of the heavy cost of blood and the gravity of losses they will pay as a price for their continued aggression on our community and looting of our wealth," unquote. And that metaphor is fascinating to me. An oil tanker as the umbilical cord of the world trade system. Osama bin Laden was, by all accounts, a murdering asshole. I don't like him. But that metaphor rings true to me. The World Trade System, which has been created and expanded by many of the highest-ranking officials in our government since World War II, does seem to revolve around fossil fuels, and the bombing of an oil tanker did prompt a fierce reaction, because after a visit by Darth Vader Dick Cheney himself to President Salah of Yemen, the United States started drone bombing human beings in Yemen, and that has continued for 17 years and counting. Now, I could go on for days about things that happened during the George W. Bush administration. This is how I got to be this Congress-obsessed thing to begin with. But for the purposes of this episode, which is to figure out what exactly we're doing in Yemen now, how long we've been doing it, and why Congress is suddenly trying to stop our involvement there, I do want to fast forward and start this story on Christmas Day 2009, inside of some super stanky underpants. Here's a mashup of an investigation aired by WXYZ7 in Detroit in 2012, which of course you can watch unedited using the links in this episode's show notes.
On Christmas Day 2009, a day of celebration and peace, a potential catastrophe was unfolding in the skies over Metro Detroit. A Nigerian-born suicide bomber, Umar Farouk Abdul was preparing to take down a flight from Amsterdam with explosives hidden in his underwear. Abdul father was a wealthy banker. The parents cared deeply for him and sent him to the finest private schools. At a young age, Abdul became obsessed with radical Islam, seeking out information on the internet. Abdul became a devoted follower of Anwar al-Awlaki, an American-born recruiter and motivator for Al-Qaeda working in Yemen. And here's something that'll probably surprise you. Abdul was not recruited by Al-Qaeda. He actually recruited Al-Qaeda.
And he sought out Al-Qaeda relentlessly. He persisted, and he was almost turned away at times, by Al-Qaeda, but he refused to relent.
Abdul left Britain, where he was working on a master's degree in engineering, and headed for an Al-Qaeda training camp in Yemen and cut off contact with his parents. For Abdul convincing Al-Qaeda he was for real took some doing. They scrutinized him at their training camp for a long time.
And I think that once they evaluated his conviction was absolute, they determined that his best role was going to be as a suicide bomber.
He'd been instructed to detonate the bomb over a populated area to maximize the death toll. Using a plastic syringe, Abdul injected a mixture of liquids and solids into the explosive chemicals already packed into his underwear. But instead of exploding, the bomb burst into flames, setting his clothes and the blanket on fire, seriously burning him. Agents say he wore the underwear bomb for 3 weeks straight to get comfortable with it and to make sure it would not be detected, taking it off only to shower.
So basically for 3 weeks he wore this garment, these underwear with this device in it. We think ultimately that probably is what caused a little bit of separation in this sequence of events in the explosion.
The confession that Agent Ted Pysyk got on the first day without reading Abdul his Miranda rights held up in court. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms.
Now, dumbass wannabe murderers fail to hurt other people all the time, and most of the time, we don't even really know about it. But this failed attack, the underwear bomber, everybody knew about the underwear bomber because, well, this motherfucker tried to blow up his own panties. That's comedic gold.
You know what, intelligence community? Meet me at camera 3. All right. I know you guys are busy. Those 300 million Americans can't wiretap themselves, but remember something. This guy, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, he paid cash, he flew one way. He had no luggage from a European capital and tried to blow up a plane with PETN explosives hidden in his shoes 8 years ago. So now, 8 years later, the Lex Luthor-like geniuses of Al-Qaeda decided, I got an idea. This time, why don't we have a guy pay cash and fly one way, no luggage from a European capital with the PETN explosives hidden under his nutsack. In 8 years, all they did was move the explosive up whatever the inseam measurement is. Now look, I realize security will never be 100%. We don't expect you to catch everything, but we do expect you to catch the exact same thing. It was the Nigerian with no luggage on the watch list with a taint full of gunpowder. That's not even Clue. That's Clue Jr. That's Blue's Clues.
That was Jon Stewart on The Daily Show on January 4th, 2010, their first episode back after the holiday break. And then 2 days later, here's parts of how Jon Stewart opened that show.
In a little while there, in a minute, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, will be out. and I'm going to get a chance to ask him about the one place that is on everybody's mind.
Yemen.
The nation of Yemen.
The terror trail leads back to Yemen.
So where is this new nexus of terror? Fire up the Google Maps with the flying and the zooming and the complete and total lack of context. Oh, Yemen is next to Oman. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, quick question. Where's Oman? I know that the Yemen thing complicates the war on terror, but on the plus side, getting attacked is really the only way we Americans learn about world geography. But we've been in this situation before. Random country we've never really heard of attacks us, and there is a laundry list of reasons as to why it is an existential and hopeless situation. It's time once again, if you'll join me, to play War on Terror Sad Libs, a tragic game for ages 9 to 99. Let's begin. I can assume Al-Qaeda cannot be stopped in Yemen because
the government has been battling two other internal wars, one with Shiite rebels in the north and another with separatists in the south.
Ooh, only two looming civil wars. There's hope for you yet, Yemen. And of course, the capital city, Sana'a.
Sana'a is relatively stable, under government control.
And what would happen if I left Sana'a?
There's another Yemen, run not by the largely pro-American Yemeni government, but well-armed tribes, many sympathetic to Islamic radicals and militants.
There's always another Yemen. The country is a breeding ground for terrorism because
50% unemployment.
Nearly half of the population under the age of 15.
Have we thought about deploying Hannah Montana? Of course, what's really going to make the fighting difficult is
its mountains rise 4,000 feet above sea level in some areas.
Mostly mountains, valleys, caves, almost impossible to seal off.
And the few roads that do exist are difficult to travel.
Can't we get in a war with paved countries? To top it off, if America invades, it will find itself in a world of, I need a noun.
Poop and
So that's Yemen, a place we'll be hearing about for 24 hours a day until we get bogged down there and the insurgency moves to Oman.
That was almost a decade ago, and now we're bogged down in a war in Yemen. It was so easy to predict. But the point is that there have been so many media frenzies since then that we may have forgotten. But in the beginning of 2010, we were all bombarded with reasons to fear Yemen. Every single day on the news, Yemen terror, Yemen terror, Yemen terror, be afraid. And so, the month after the failed underwear bombing, our fearless leaders in Britain and the United States formed the Friends of Yemen group. That was actually the name. And they quickly assembled an international conference of 24 countries to, as reported in the New York Times, quote, host an international summit meeting on combating Islamic radicalization in Yemen, unquote. And so what did they decide to do at that meeting on combating Islamic radicalization? Well, this is David Miliband, who was at the time the British Foreign Secretary. He was speaking at a press conference, updating reporters on what was decided at the Friends of Yemen's group conference. He's seated right next to the Yemeni foreign minister at the time, who was Abdul Bakr al-Kurbi, and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Working closely with the government of Yemen, we decided that our agenda needed to cover agreement on the nature of the problem and then address the solutions across the economic, social and political terrain. 5 key items were agreed at the meeting for the way in which the international community can support progress in Yemen. First, confirmation by the government of Yemen that it will continue to pursue its reform agenda, an agreement to start discussion of an IMF programme. The director of the IMF, represented at the meeting, made a compelling case for the way in which economic reform could be supported by the IMF. This is important because it will provide welcome support and help the government of Yemen confront its immediate challenges.
Oh my God, here we go again. We're told the masters of the universe are meeting to stop terrorists and bad guys, and they did pay lip service to that. But then the actual meeting is used to integrate other countries into the World Trade System. And I swear to God, I'm not going looking for this pattern. It just keeps appearing. The way I started my research for this episode, knowing that I knew jack shit about Yemen, was that I went through the C-SPAN archives and saw that there was very little attention paid towards Yemen, almost no meetings or discussion about it at all, until the beginning of 2010, and then the floodgates opened. So I watched everything that looked interesting starting in 2010, starting with this press conference, and there it was. The government of Yemen was being pressured by us to enact IMF reforms. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, who don't see the significance of this, over the last 6.5 years of paying attention, I have collected a lot of evidence pointing towards our true foreign policy being aimed at integrating the entire world into the World Trade System, which is made up of the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. This economic system was created after World War II and is intended to be global. And I really didn't understand this at all until the Trans-Pacific Partnership happened, and then I researched the World Trade Organization's beginnings. And I think the World Trade Organization, I researched that in, I think it was 2015. I'll put that episode in the show notes for you. But basically, the idea is, and always has been, by creating this World Trade System, that if the entire world operates under one economic system, there will be no reason for war, and there will be peace. Except the problem is that the World Trade System's economic system was created by the richest families in the world and the corporations that funnel money to them. The system isn't democratic at all. We get no votes in this system. No peasants in any countries do. And in practice, we peasants often get fucked by their policies. The economic reforms forced and coerced upon countries always include selling off their valuable resources to multinational corporations. The governments are also always required to cut benefits for the peasants, because anything that can be done for a profit by the multinationals is supposed to be done for a profit by the multinationals. This is branded as freedom for the market. But it's rigged as fuck because the governments aren't free to choose to have their government operate many parts of their societies if they want to do so. It's always less government, more privatization. Privatization that funnels more and more money into the multinationals and therefore the stock market. Endless economic growth for the stock market, which benefits only the people rich enough to buy stocks in the first place. The World Trade System is rigged. But what I've been trying to do is figure out how it's rigged and who exactly is doing it. And 3 of the central organizations in this, for sure, are the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. And the IMF is a big one. And if the corporate media wasn't literally owned by the corporations of the World Trade System, they would be watching and reporting on the IMF's actions every single day. Because the IMF gives huge, impossible to pay back loans to governments that need cash, but there are always strings. The strings they attach to the cash are demands that the governments change their economic laws. They call these changes reforms. Now, the governments that make these changes, even if it pisses off their peasants, well, those governments get money and protection from our military. Because us United States peasants, we're the muscle for all this, which is why we have military bases like everywhere. But the government officials, the presidents and prime ministers who do what the IMF says, they get to be the World Trade System partners. They get protection from our military and they get money. A lot of money. A lot of it our tax money. Because as the largest shareholder in the IMF, us U.S. peasants also pay the largest amount into it. But the presidents and prime ministers who do not submit, the ones who either refuse to enact the reforms or do so too slowly, they get thrown out of office. Sometimes violently, like when the George W. Bush administration overthrew Saddam Hussein in Iraq, or when the Barack Obama administration overthrew Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And I'll put the Libya episode in the show notes too, because that one's nuts. But those government overthrows were obvious. But sometimes they're more sneaky, like the Obama administration's orchestration of the 2014 coup in Ukraine and their failed attempts at a coup in Syria. And it turns out that Yemen fits right into the pattern. Here's then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the January 2010 Masters of the Universe Friends of Yemen conference.
The United States just signed a 3-year umbrella assistance agreement with the government of Yemen that will augment Yemen's capacity to make progress. This package includes initiatives that will cover a range of programs, but the overarching goal of our work is to increase the capacity and governance of Yemen and give the people of Yemen the opportunity to better make choices in their own lives. President Saleh has outlined a 10-point plan for economic reform, along with the country's national reform agenda. Those are encouraging signs of progress. Neither, however, will mean much if they are not implemented. So we expect Yemen to enact reforms, continue to combat corruption, and improve the country's investment and business climate.
So we're told it's all about terrorists, while Secretary of State Hillary is telling Yemen our priority is the business climate. And so, in the beginning of January 2010, a 10-point plan for economic reform was created for Yemen. And the 10 points were 1. Replace senior government officials, which is an awfully strange thing for the president Salah. I don't know. Let's call him Saleh, because that's what Hillary said. But replacing senior government officials is a strange thing for President Saleh to put in his plan. But anyway, that's number 1. Number 2 was to allow Yemenis to work in other countries around the Persian Gulf. Number 3 was to reduce fossil fuel subsidies. Number 4, we wanted them to fast-track oil exploration. Surprise, surprise. Number 5, we wanted to make the banks more comfortable with lending in Yemen. Number 6, we also wanted to get Yemen's president to support this plan. And I want to hold up here for just a second, because just the fact that this was in the 10-point plan makes it pretty damn obvious that President Saleh himself was not on board right from the start. Someone created this 10-point plan, but it clearly wasn't him, because why would he make firing his own people and convincing himself a part of the plan? And so Hillary labeling this as the president's plan is another fib by her. We'll just add that to the list. But anyway, continuing, number 7 was that they wanted to develop the port of Aden. Number 8, they wanted enforcement of the government's authority to uphold the rule of law. Number 9, they wanted water reform, because Yemen doesn't have a lot of water, so God only knows what kind of reforms they wanted. That's a rabbit hole I didn't go down. And then number 10, they wanted to improve Yemen's image in the world. But the 2 bigs in that 10-point plan that I want you to remember is that number 3, the IMF and Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration and all these world traders, they wanted Yemen to reduce the fossil fuel subsidies for the peasants. And number 6, they wanted to get Yemen's President Saleh to support this plan. Because he didn't. But others in his government were singing a different tune. Here's Foreign Minister Abu Bakr al-Kurdi speaking right after and seated right next to Hillary Clinton.
This commitment also stems from our belief that the challenges we are facing now cannot be remedied unless we implement this agenda of reforms and the 10 points that Her Excellency alluded to, because this is now a priority number of issues that we have to start with, and I hope this is will be one of the outcomes of this meeting.
So that was the beginning of 2010. And during the course of 2010, following this meeting, President Saleh sometimes did what the Obama administration wanted, and sometimes he didn't. For instance, according to leaked WikiLeaks cable that really pissed off the Obama administration, President Saleh and the Obama administration had made a deal that the United States could drone bomb as they pleased within Yemen, so long as President Saleh could lie to his people and say his government was responsible for the bombings. He didn't want his peasants to know that he was authorizing the United States to kill them at will. But President Saleh refused the Obama administration's request to send advisors, boots on the ground, if you will, into Yemen to direct the Yemen military that we were funding. And President Saleh also frustrated the Obama administration with the slow speed of his economic reforms. John Brennan, then the Obama administration's CIA director, said in December 2010, quote, "We frequently push the Yemenis to move further and faster along the path of economic and political reform and to be more aggressive in the actions they take against Al-Qaeda. For their part, the Yemenis complain that our security and development assistance flows are too slow and encumbered by bureaucratic requirements and complications, and that we expect economic and political reforms virtually overnight without understanding the implications of such reforms on Yemeni society and stability, and that we are more interested in fighting Al-Qaeda than in helping the Yemeni people," unquote. And so President Saleh and the Obama administration were far from besties. And President Saleh was committing the ultimate sin. He was dragging ass on those economic reforms. And then a miracle. In the beginning of 2011 was the Arab Spring. there were protests started near universities that took place inside Yemen against the government of President Saleh. And by the end of April in 2011, in response to the protests, members of the president's political party, President Saleh's political party, had formally agreed to a deal created by the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, which is a political and economic alliance of 6 countries in the Arabian Peninsula, which would remove President Saleh from power. There was one problem, however, which is that President Saleh was not on board. Just like with the 10-point plan that was created by someone in his party but not him, the GCC deal that removed him from the presidency wasn't his doing either, and he refused to sign the deal. But then in June 2011, 2 months later, a bomb was planted inside the mosque where President Saleh always observed his Friday prayers, seriously injuring him and almost killing him. He was flown to Saudi Arabia to recover from his injuries, and pressure for him to sign the GCC agreement removing him from power only increased. However, his family members remained in the presidential palace, and he didn't sign the agreement. And that's where the situation stalled when Congress had a hearing in July of 2011. Here's the Obama administration's Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Janet Sanderson, testifying to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on July 19, 2011.
The United States continues its regular engagement with the government, including with President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who's currently, as you know, recovering in Saudi Arabia from his injuries following a June 3rd attack on his compound, the acting president, Vice President Abdul Rabuh Mansour al-Hadi, the opposition, civil society activists, and others interested in Yemen's future. We strongly support the Gulf Cooperation Council's initiative, which we believe would lead to a peaceful and orderly political transition. The GCC initiative, signed by both the ruling General People's Congress Party and the opposition coalition joint meeting parties. Only President Saleh is blocking the agreement moving forward, and we continue to call on him to sign the initiative.
And in case the State Department's goal wasn't clear enough from that clip,
we strongly believe that a transition is necessary, that an orderly, peaceful transition is the only way to begin to lead Yemen out of the crisis that it has been in for the last few months.
And here's one more. Here's Daniel Benjamin, Obama's State Department counterterrorism coordinator.
Really, I just want to echo what Ambassador Sanderson said. It is vitally important that the transition take place.
Pretty damn clear. The Obama administration in the summer of 2011 was pushing for regime change, the overthrow of President Saleh's government, a transition. And by the end of November 2011, they got it. On November 23, 2011, President Ali Abdullah Saleh of Yemen signed on to the transition plan that kicked him out of office in return for immunity for himself and his family from prosecutions. And part of the plan that he signed required Yemen to hold a presidential election in February 2012 with only one candidate on the ballot. Former Vice President, I don't know how to say his name, but his last name is Hadi. And surprise, surprise, President Hadi won the election. The plan also called for a conference, the National Dialogue Conference, that was supposed to bring all the Yemenis groups together to make governing decisions in preparations for the country's first real elections. Because when new President Hadi was originally elected in the rigged election, in which he was the only person allowed to run, he was supposed to serve a 2-year term, which means that the first real election was supposed to be held in February 2014. But that election never happened. The reason they postponed elections indefinitely was that there was concern that former President Saleh, or maybe someone from the group known as the Houthis, would win. And so democracy was suspended. And apparently, that's perfectly fine when the guy that the world traders like is in power. Because President Hadi is the person that we've been helping Saudi Arabia to keep in power. But I'm getting ahead of myself. A few months after the real election was supposed to take place but never did, a few months after democracy had been officially canceled, President Hadi cut fuel subsidies, which were keeping the price of gas affordable for Yemen peasants like you and I. President Hadi did this in order to get a $554 million loan from the International Monetary Fund, because as we already know, the IMF will loan countries money, but always demands that economic policies be changed to match what the World Trade System demands. And so in order to get the money, President Hadi cut the fuel subsidies, which immediately doubled the price of gas. And the people of Yemen got pissed, and the Houthis stepped up to lead the protests. Now, the Houthis refers to members of the Houthi family, which basically runs a giant religious cult that claims to be direct dependents of the Prophet Muhammad. And according to a report by the Congressional Research Service, the Houthis have been fighting both Yemen's government and Saudi Arabia on and off since 2004, with their ultimate goal being to redistrict Yemen in a way that gives them their own space that has access to the Red Sea and or access to oil pipelines and export facilities. Also from that Congressional Research Service report, and I just find this sentence stunning in its directness, the report says, quote, in 2014 and early 2015, the Houthis have disrupted the political transition that the United States and Saudi Arabia orchestrated 3 years ago, unquote. So no wiggle room there. We did it. In 2011, the Obama administration in Saudi Arabia regime changed Yemen. But then the Houthis went and fucked up their long-term plans. And this is all openly discussed in Congress. The following is a mashup of the opening statements of Representative Ted Deutsch of Florida, Representative David Cicilline of New Jersey, and Representative Grace Ming of New York, in a hearing that took place in April 2015 in the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Middle East and North Africa.
Following the deposition of Yemen's longtime autocratic ruler Saleh in 2011, the U.S. supported an inclusive transition process via a national dialogue aimed at rebuilding the country's political and governmental institutions and bridging gaps between groups that have had a long history of conflict. Yemen's first newly elected leader, President Hadi, made clear his intentions to cooperate closely with the United States.
The United States poured approximately $900 million in foreign aid to Yemen since the transition in 2011.
And while the national dialogue was initially viewed as successful, the process concluded in 2014 with several key reforms still not completed, including the drafting of a new constitution. The Hadi government had continued to face deep opposition from Yemen's northern tribes, mainly the Shiite Iranian-backed Houthi rebels. Over the past year, the Houthis, in coordination with tribes and military units still loyal to Saleh, began increasing their territorial control.
On January 21st, a fragile power-sharing deal between democratically elected President Hadi and the Houthi rebel group in Yemen fell apart, and the Houthis began seizing control of large portions of Yemen. These actions were troubling because of the Houthis' illegal usurpation of power and their immediate dissolving of the Yemeni parliament.
The Houthis are well-trained, well-funded, and experienced fighters, having fought the Yemeni government and Saudi Arabia in 2009.
On March 26, Saudi Arabia and more than 10 Arab partners began airstrikes to weaken the Houthi stronghold and reinstate President Hadi to the presidency.
I think it's safe to say that the quick deterioration of the situation in Yemen took many people here in Washington by surprise.
And here was the Obama administration's response to these events. This is a mashup of the testimony of Gerald Fierstein, who at the time of this testimony was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. And before that, he was the United States ambassador to Yemen during the regime change.
I greatly appreciate this opportunity to come before you today to review recent developments in Yemen and the efforts that the United States is undertaking to support the government of Yemen under President Abdul Mansur Hadi and the Saudi-led coalition of Operation Decisive Storm that is aimed at restoring the legitimate government and restarting the negotiations to find peaceful political solutions to Yemen's internal conflict. To the best of our understanding, the Houthis are not controlled directly by Iran. Iran provides financial support, weapons, training, and intelligence to the Houthis. We are also particularly concerned about the ongoing destabilizing role played by former President Saleh, who, since his removal from power in 2011, has actively plotted to undermine President Hadi and the political transition process. Despite UN sanctions and international condemnation of his actions, Saleh continues to be one of the primary sources of the chaos in Yemen. We have been working with our Gulf partners in the international community to isolate him and prevent the continuation of his efforts to undermine the peaceful transition. Success in that effort will go a long way to helping Yemen return to a credible political transition process. I mean, obviously, our hope would be that if we can get the situation stabilized and get the political process going again, that we would be able to return and that we would be able to continue implementing the kinds of programs that we were trying to achieve that are aimed at economic growth and development, as well as supporting democratic governance and the opportunity to try to build solid political foundations for the society. At this particular moment, we can't do that, but it's hard to predict where we might be in 6 months or 9 months from now.
So, regime change fail. And here's why the Obama administration's point man, the Yemen ambassador during the regime change, said that the regime change failed. This is Representative Ted Yoho of Florida questioning Gerald Fierstein.
How can we be that far off? And I know you explained the counterterrorism portion, but yet to have a country taken over while we're sitting there, working with them, and this happens, I feel, it just kind of happened overnight, the way our embassy got run out of town and just says you have to leave, your Marines cannot take their weapons with them. I don't understand how that happens or how we can be that disconnected. What are your thoughts on that?
It was very frustrating. Again, I think that if you go back to where we were a year ago, the successful conclusion of the National Dialogue Conference, which was really the last major hurdle in completion of the GCC initiative. Houthis participated in that. They participated in the constitutional drafting exercise, which was completed successfully. And so we were in the process of moving through all of the requirements of the GCC initiative that would allow us to complete successfully the political transition. I think there were a combination of things. One, that there was a view on the part of the Houthis that they were not getting everything that they wanted. They were provoked, in our view, by Ali Abdullah Saleh, who never stopped plotting from the very first day after he signed the agreement on the GCC initiative. He never stopped plotting to try to block the political transition. And there was, to be frank, there was a weakness in the government and an inability on the part of the government to really build the kind of alliances and coalition that would allow them to sustain popular support and to bring this to a successful conclusion. And so I think that all through this period there was a sense that we were moving forward and that we believed that we could succeed in implementing this peaceful transition, and yet we always knew that on the margins there were threats and there were risks. And unfortunately, we got to a point where the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Saleh, my personal view is that they recognized that they had reached the last possible moment where they could obstruct the peaceful political transition. That was bad for them because it would mean that they wouldn't get everything that they wanted. And so they saw that time was running out for them, and they decided to act. And unfortunately, the government was unable to stop them.
And remember, the reason that us U.S. tax-paying peasants were told that we were spending our money and killing people in Yemen was because of terrorists. It was all because of Al-Qaeda. They used the 9/11 authorization for the use of military force, the 9/11 AUMF, to legally justify our bombings and payments, all of it. Well, because we prioritized propping up the Hadi government and the IMF reforms he was willing to make, reforms that pissed off the peasants and led to a chaotic government overthrow, here's the effect that all of that had on Al-Qaeda.
When the political crisis came in Yemen in 2011, AQAP was able to take advantage of that and increase its territorial control to the extent that they were actually declaring areas of the country to be an Islamic caliphate, not unlike what we see with ISIL in Iraq and Syria these days. And because of our cooperation, primarily our cooperation with Yemeni security forces, we were able to defeat that at a significant loss of life for AQAP. And so while AQAP was by no means defeated and continued to be a major threat to security here in the United States as well as in Yemen and elsewhere around the world, nevertheless, I think that it was legitimate to say that we had achieved some success in the fight against AQAP. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now, because of the change in the situation again inside of Yemen, is that we're losing some of the gains that we were able to make during that period of 2012 to 2014. And that's why it's so important that we have the ability to get the political negotiations started again so that we can reestablish legitimate government inside of Sana'a that will cooperate with us once again in this fight against violent extremist organizations.
And so Al-Qaeda, AQAP, and other hater groups were able to reorganize and claim territory because the government the Obama administration and the Saudi royals installed fell apart, just like in Libya. And if the leadership of the Democratic Party is still confused as to why many of us just couldn't vote for their chosen one, Hillary Clinton, in 2016, let me clear it up for you, especially with 2020 around the corner. It's war. It's that many of us were absolutely horrified by what the Republican George W. Bush administration did to Iraq and Afghanistan, but really Iraq, because Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and we all know it, especially now. And so we voted for Democrats in 2008 because we thought that was our only other option, and we liked the idea of hope and change. We hoped Obama would change us from being the world's monsters to being the shining city on the hill again, if we ever were. But the point is that we wanted the wars to stop. And they fucking didn't. The Obama administration doubled down in Afghanistan. We're still there. The Obama administration said we pulled out of Iraq, but we never really did. I still don't understand how they ever claimed that. The Obama administration regime changed Libya, which was Hillary's project. And I've documented on this podcast how the Obama administration regime changed Ukraine, which was Joe Biden's project. And let me tell you this right now, within 48 hours of him announcing his candidacy, I will never, ever vote for Joe Biden for president of the United States for the same reasons that I wouldn't vote for Hillary. His voting record, his actions when in office, and his devotion to expanding the undemocratic world trade system. Biden voted yes on bank deregulation. Biden voted yes on the Patriot Act. Biden voted yes on the AUMF that has been authorizing our endless wars since 9/11. Biden voted yes on the Iraq war. And he fucking did Ukraine. And I'll be damned if I'm ever going to vote for this World Trade System loyalist to be the most powerful person in our government, especially knowing his long record of using our money and our friends as cannon fodder to enact a global economic system that benefits only the elite group of stock market profiteers of which he is a part of. And I'm not alone. And now I find out that the Obama administration, which Joe Biden was vice president of, regime changed Yemen too. There were so many regime changes during the Obama administration that we don't even know about them all. And I know President Trump is awful. All the lying and the racism and the business corruption and the complete lack of respect for the other co-equal branches of government. But Joe Biden is dangerous in a different, more deadly way. And he's smarter. At least Trump appears to be pretty dumb. And, even if Trump had some evil Hitler plot on his wish list, his band of bumbling fools, it's pretty clear, wouldn't be able to implement it anyway. But I don't want to see what Joe Biden does to this world, because his plan for world domination, the World Trade System, that thing has been in progress for 70 years, and a lot of people have died because of it. And so, Democrats, this is my warning to you. Pick anyone else. I and the people like me who couldn't vote for Hillary are not looking for perfection, but we're at least looking for someone who is loyal to the United States, not the global elites and corporations who funnel money to them via the World Trade System. Joe Biden is, without a doubt, one of them. And nominating him to be the Democratic nominee would be the best thing you could do to re-elect Donald Trump. And so that is my warning to you. And so now that that's off my chest, let's get back to Yemen. Where was I? Okay, so a regime change orchestrated by Saudi Arabia and the Obama administration had failed, which led to a full-blown war. And this is where the timeline usually begins when Yemen is discussed lately, with the fall of the Hadi government and the Saudi-led war. The part of the story that is consistently left out is all that stuff I just told you about the United States' role in overthrowing President Saleh and installing the Hadi government to begin with. Well, one problem in the regime change game that has recently been taken care of is the guy that the Saudis and the Obama administration overthrew, President Saleh. The following clip is from a hearing almost exactly a year ago in April 2018. This is David Satterfield, who at the time was Trump's acting assistant secretary of state for Near Eastern Affairs.
The political picture on the ground in Yemen has changed radically with the death, the killing of Ali Abdullah Saleh, with the fragmentation of the General People's Congress. All of that, while tragic in many of its dimensions, has provided a certain reshuffling of the deck that may, we hope, allow the United Nations to be more effective in its efforts.
And in a nice change of pace, it appears that we were not involved in killing him. It seems that the Houthis did the killing. But it does make it official. President Saleh will not be making a comeback. The Obama administration did get their regime change finalized after all. But President Hadi, he doesn't control the government as long as he's in exile and the Houthis control Yemen's capital. And so that's what the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates are trying to fix with our help. They want the Houthis out, and they want the guy who canceled democracy in Yemen to be back in charge again. But here's the thing. Times have changed since that war to reinstall Hadi was launched in 2015, and we're now living in the Trump administration. And so let's find out where they're at on this whole Yemen thing. You just heard a clip from one of them, but like I said, almost exactly a year ago on consecutive days, the House and Senate had hearings about the war in Yemen. The following clip is from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing. This is Senator Todd Young of Indiana questioning Robert Jenkins, who is the Trump administration's Deputy Assistant Administrator at USAID's Bureau for Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance. And keep in mind that this testimony was a full year ago. The situation has only gotten worse from here.
Approximately how many people, Mr. Jenkins, require humanitarian assistance in Yemen?
22 million people.
What percent of the population is that?
Approximately 75%.
Was the number of people requiring humanitarian assistance increased from last year?
It increased by, we're estimating 3.5 million people.
And how much has it increased?
About 3.5 million people. Yeah.
Okay. How many are severely food insecure?
17.8 million.
How many children are severely malnourished?
460,000.
How many people lack access to clean water and working toilets?
We estimate it to be around 16 million people.
Does Yemen face the largest cholera outbreak in the world?
It does.
How many cholera cases have we seen in Yemen?
A suspected over 1 million cases.
And how many lives has that cholera outbreak claimed?
Almost 2,300.
And so that's a major reason why Yemen is on Congress's radar. That's a lot of suffering peasants, and it's too much to ignore. But we know that caring about peasants is not really the most important thing. It never is. Otherwise, both parties wouldn't be on board with drone bombing anyone they want, regardless of what innocent people get killed in the process. No, the real reason we're involved in Yemen remains this reason, as outlined by Robert Karem, who worked at the Defense Department at the time of this testimony. And to get an idea of who this dude is, he was Middle East policy advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney during the second half of the W. Bush administration. He was a policy advisor for oil man Jeb Bush during his pathetic presidential run. And he was an advisor to Koch brothers congressman turned CIA director turned Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And so here's what this servant of the fossil fuel titans told Congress as a member of the Trump Defense Department in April of 2018.
Conflict in Yemen affects regional security across the Middle East. And threatens U.S. national security interests, including the free flow of commerce in the Red Sea. Just this month, the Houthis attacked a Saudi oil tanker in the Red Sea, threatening commercial shipping and freedom of navigation in the world's fourth busiest maritime choke point, the Babel Mundob.
We must protect the flow of oil. And here's how the Trump administration is doing it.
The Defense Department is currently engaged in 2 lines of effort in Yemen. Our first line of effort and our priority is the fight against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and ISIS in Yemen, 2 terrorist organizations that directly threaten the United States, our allies, and our partners. To combat AQAP, and ISIS, U.S. forces, in coordination with the UN-recognized government of Yemen, are supporting our regional counterterrorism partners in ongoing operations to disrupt and degrade their ability to coordinate, plot, and recruit for external terrorist operations. Additionally, U.S. military forces are conducting airstrikes against AQAP and ISIS in Yemen, pursuant to the 2001 authorization for the use of military force to disrupt and destroy terrorist networks. Our second line of effort is the provision of limited, non-combat support to the Saudi-led coalition in support of the UN-recognized government of Yemen. This support began in 2015 under President Obama, and in 2017, President Trump reaffirmed America's commitment to our partners in these efforts. Fewer than 50 U.S. military personnel work in Saudi Arabia with the Saudi-led coalition, advising and assisting with the defense of Saudi territory, sharing intelligence, and providing logistical support, including aerial refueling.
Fewer than 50 military personnel is not no military personnel. So our military is involved. We're sharing intelligence and we're helping the Saudis pick targets. And we've been providing aerial support, which means that we have been refueling Saudi bombers in the air so they can get back to bombing their neighbors in Yemen faster without having to land. But get this. This is Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland questioning the then Defense Department guy, Robert Carem.
Mr. Carm, I'm going to start with you in regards to the U.S. military assistance that we give to the kingdom. You said that is to embolden their capacity and to reduce non-combatant casualties. Last March, the SITCOM commander, General Votel, stated that the United States government does not track the end results of the coalition missions it refuels and supports with targeting assistance. So my question to you is, how do you determine that we are effectively reducing the non-combatant casualties if we don't, in fact, track the results of the kingdom's military actions?
Senator, thank you. It's correct that we do not monitor and track all of the Saudi aircraft aloft over Yemen. We have limited personnel and assets in order to do that. And CENTCOM's focus has obviously been on our own operations in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Syria.
I understand that. So, but my question is, our stated mission is to reduce non-combatant casualties. If we don't track, how do we determine that?
So I think one of our stated missions is precisely that. There are multiple ways that I think we do have insight into Saudi targeting behavior. We have helped them with their processes. We have seen them implement a no-strike list, and we have seen their capabilities improve.
So the information is based upon what the Saudis tell you how they're conducting the mission, rather than the after impact of the mission?
I think our military officers who are resident in Saudi Arabia are seeing how the Saudis approach this effort, the targeting effort.
But, you know, obviously the proof is in the results, and we don't know whether results are there or not. Is that a fair statement?
I think we do see a difference in how the Saudis have operated in Yemen.
I understand and how they operate, but we don't know whether, in fact, that's been effective. The United Nations Security Council panel of experts on Yemen concluded in recent reports that the cumulative effect of these airstrikes on civilian infrastructure demonstrates that even with precautionary measures were taken, they were largely inadequate and ineffective. Do you have any information that disagrees with that assessment?
Senator, I think the assessment of our Central Command is that the Saudi and Emirati targeting efforts have improved with the steps that they have taken. We do not have perfect understanding because we're not using all of our assets to monitor their aircraft, but we do get reporting from the ground on what is taking place inside Yemen.
I understand that, and I would just caution you to be reserved as to how effective you are in that if you don't have direct information about it. This is the U.S. reputation is online, and we expect you to know if you report something. If you can't report it, fine, but don't make statements that you can't back up.
So 1 year ago, Congress was informed that the Trump administration had no idea what the Saudis were hitting in Yemen. They weren't keeping track. Well, let me tell you about a few things the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates, we keep letting them off the hook, but they're involved in this too. Well, let me tell you what they've hit. In September 2015, at least 130 civilians were killed when they bombed a wedding reception. In October 2016, they dropped a bunch of Made in America bombs on a funeral, killing 155 civilians. Now, for our part, after the 2016 funeral bombing, the Obama administration stopped allowing sales of precision-guided bombs to Saudi Arabia, but kept on refueling their warplanes so that they could keep the bombings coming faster. But in May of 2017, a few months after taking office, businessman above all else, Donald Trump, overturned the missile ban, allowing Saudi Arabia to buy them once again from the multinationals that we call American. And look at that, a year later, a few months after this hearing in August 2018, they dropped another Made in America bomb on a school bus, killing 44 children. And they called these mistakes. And those are just a few examples. The numbers are unclear, but we know at least 4,600 people, just like us, civilians minding their own damn business, have been killed by bombs dropped by our side from the sky. And to make matters worse, Yemen's agriculture situation is not great. They don't have a lot of water, and so they import about 70% of their food. But our side has blocked the food from getting into the country. And we have bombed and destroyed fishing and agricultural targets. We're using food as a weapon of war, which is why so many people who have so far survived the bombings are starving to death. And so how does the Trump administration justify our actions, helping the Saudis and the United Emirates execute this war? Well, here's David Satterfield again from a year ago.
U.S. military support serves a clear and strategic purpose: to reinforce Saudi and Emirati self-defense in the face of intensifying Houthi and Iranian-enabled threats, and to expand the capability of our Gulf partners to push back against Iran's regionally destabilizing actions. This support, in turn, provides the United States access and influence to help press for a political solution to the conflict. Should we curtail U.S. military support, the Saudis could well pursue defense relationships with countries that have no interest in either ending the humanitarian crisis, minimizing civilian casualties, or assisting in facilitating progress towards a political solution. Critical U.S. access to support for our own campaign against violent extremists could be placed in jeopardy.
So we're partnering with the Saudis and the Emiratis on this because the Trump administration doesn't want them partnering with anyone else, and we don't want to jeopardize our ability to bomb Yemen. Oh my God. And when it comes to the Saudi Arabian partnership that we have going on, they're not really partners with us. Saudi Arabia is a partner of the multinational weapons manufacturers that we label as American. And right in the beginning of the Trump administration, the Saudi royals said that they wanted to buy $110 billion in weapons from these World Trade System companies. And big mouth President Trump, we can always count on him to run his yap and exhibit the shameless corruption of business interests that fuels his administration. This is from October, about 6 months ago.
I would not be in favor of stopping a country from spending $110 billion, which is an all-time record, and letting Russia have that money and letting China have that money, because all they're going to do is say, that's okay, we don't have to buy it from Boeing, we don't have to buy it from Lockheed, we don't have to buy it from Raytheon and all these great companies. We'll buy it from Russia, we'll buy it from China. So what good does that do us?
So we need to stay partners with the Saudis so that the multinationals can funnel Saudi money to the people who profit from betting on these manufacturers of death in the stock market. It's all about money. $110 billion in weapons money. And so now let's compare that to what the Trump administration State Department said that the coalition is so generously giving to our fellow peasants in Yemen to help them deal with constantly being bombed and prevented from eating. This is then Acting Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, David Satterfield.
We all agree, as does the Congress, that the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is unacceptable. Last month, the governments of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates provided $1 billion to Yemen's humanitarian response appeal. And this complements the U.S. government pledge of $87 million and more than $854 million contributed since beginning of fiscal year 2017.
$1 billion compared to $110 billion for weapons. Please. It is time for Senator Rand Paul's speech.
Ambassador Satterfield, I guess some people, when they think about our strategy, might question the idea of our strategy. You know, if your son was shooting off his pistol in the backyard and doing it indiscriminately and endangering the neighbors, would you give him more bullets or less? And we see the Saudis acting in an indiscriminate manner. They've bombed funeral processions. They've killed a lot of civilians. And so our strategy is to give them more bombs, not less. And we say, well, if we don't give them the bombs, somebody else will. And that's sort of this global strategy that many in the bipartisan foreign policy consensus have. We have to always be involved. We always have to provide weapons or someone else will, and they'll act even worse. But there's, I guess, a lot of examples that doesn't seem to be improving their behavior. You can argue it's marginally better since we've been giving them more weapons, but it seems the opposite of logic. You would think you would give people less, or you might withhold aid or withhold assistance to the Saudis to get them to behave. But we do sort of the opposite. We give them more aid. What would your response be to that?
Senator, when I noted in my remarks that progress had been made on this issue of targeting, minimizing, or mitigating civilian casualties, that phrase was carefully chosen. And to elaborate further on my colleague's remarks, Robert Karam, we do work with the Saudis and have, particularly over the last 6 to 9 months, worked intensively on the types of munitions the Saudis are using, how they are using, how to discriminate target sets, how to assure, through increased loiter time by aircraft, that the targets sought are indeed clear of collateral or civilian damage. This is new. This is not the type of interaction that we had with the Saudis during the time when those horrific...
And yet the overall situation in Yemen is a disaster.
The overall situation is extremely bad,
right.
Senator.
So I guess that's really my question. We ought to rethink, and I think from a common sense point of view, a lot of people would question giving people who misbehave more weapons instead of giving them less. On another question, which I think is a broad question about, what we are doing in the Middle East in general, you admitted that there's not really a military solution in Yemen. Most people say it's going to be a political solution. The Houthis will still remain. We're not going to have Hiroshima. We're not going to have unconditional surrender and the good guys win and the bad guys are vanquished. Same with Syria. Most people have said for years, both the Obama administration and this administration, probably even the Bush administration, this situation will probably be a political solution. They will no longer, it's not going to be complete vanquishment of the enemy. We're also saying that in Afghanistan. And I guess my point as I think about that is I think about the recruiter at the station in Omaha, Nebraska, trying to get somebody to sign up for the military and saying, please join. We're going to send you to 3 different wars where there is no military solution. We're hoping to make it maybe a little bit better. I think back to Vietnam. We're going to take one more village. If we take one more village, they're going to negotiate. We'll get a little bit better negotiation. I just can't see sending our young men and women to die for that, for one more village. The Taliban have 40% in Afghanistan. What are we going to get? When they get to 30%, they'll negotiate, and it'll have been worth it for the people who have to go in and die and take those villages. I don't think it's one more life. I don't think it's worth one more life. The war in Yemen's not ours. We talk all about the Iranians have launched hundreds of missiles. Well, yeah, and the Saudis have launched 16,000 attacks. Who started it? It's a little bit murky back and forth. The Houthis may have started taking over their government, but that was a civil war. Now we're involved in it. Who are the good guys? Are the Saudis the good guys? Are the others the bad guys? Thousands of civilians are dying. 17 million people live on the edge of starvation. I think we need to rethink whether or not military intervention, supplying the Saudis with weapons, whether all of this makes any sense at all, or whether we've made the situation worse. I mean, humanitarian crisis, we're talking about, we're going to give money. The Saudis are giving them money, and I'm like, okay, so we bomb the crap out of them, then the Saudis give them $1 billion. Maybe we could bomb less. Maybe part of the humanitarian answer is supplying less weapons to a war. There's a huge arms race going on. Why do the Iranians do what they do? They're evil. Well, or maybe they're responding to the Saudis. Who responded first? Who started it? Where did the arms race start? But if we sell $300 billion of weapons to Saudi Arabia, what are the Iranians going to do? They react. It's action and reaction throughout the Middle East. And so we paint the Iranians as these evil monster, and we just have to correct the evil monster. But the world's a much more complicated place, back and forth. And all I would ask is that we try to get outside our mindset that what we're doing is working, because I think what we're doing hasn't worked, and we've made a lot of things worse, and we're partly responsible for the humanitarian crisis in Yemen.
And so that's the conversation that was being had a year ago. There were signs that maybe the tables were turning, because Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, I mean, he's a different Republican, but he is a Republican. But something switched in the past year, because the reason that I'm producing this episode today is that both branches of Congress, the Senate twice, has passed a resolution that would force the Trump administration to remove all our forces from Yemen, except the ones fighting Al-Qaeda, which is an enormous loophole. But it would also specifically prohibit the in-air refueling of the bombers. And it appears that a catalyst for this big switch was the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in October of last year, about 6 months ago. Jamal Khashoggi was not a U.S. citizen. He was a Saudi, but he was living in Washington, D.C. and was a Washington, D.C. insider. On October 2nd, 2018, he entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, which is in Turkey, and he never left. Now, the common wisdom, and honestly, I didn't look into this all that much, but it is alleged that a team of 15 Saudis sent by the 33-year-old Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is effectively controlling Saudi Arabia right now, it is alleged that those 15 Saudis sent by the Crown Prince gruesomely murdered Khashoggi in the consulate in Turkey. And Khashoggi was extremely critical of both the Saudi prince and Donald Trump in his journalism. So, I mean, the motive was there. And in early December, the CIA gave detailed, behind-closed-door briefings to members of Congress about the murder. Many of them emerged from these meetings to speak to reporters, and they seemed deeply disturbed. And then 2 weeks later, they were voting to not really end our military involvement in Yemen. Like I said, it contained a giant loophole. But it definitely limited the help Trump would be allowed to give to the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates in the quest to get President Hadi back into power. Now, that was the end of the 115th Congress, and the House never voted on the Senate's resolution before the end of the year, so that resolution died. But then in this new Congress, the Senate voted and passed the resolution again, and this time the House did too. The official author of the resolution that passed both branches of this Congress was independent Senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. And the Sanders resolution, which is referred to as Sanders-Lee by a lot of people in Congress, with Lee being Senator Mike Lee of Utah. But that resolution passed the Senate on March 13th by a vote of 54 to 46. Every single Democrat and independent voted yes, and they were joined by 7 Republican senators: Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Todd Young of Indiana, Jerry Moran of Kansas, Rand Paul of Kentucky, Susan Collins of Maine, Steve Daines of Montana, and Mike Lee of Utah. It then passed the House on April 4th by a vote of 247 to 175. Again, every single Democrat voted yes, and they were joined by 16 House Republicans. And so for those of you keeping score based on political party, I know that the Obama administration kind of started a lot of this. But right now, the Democrats in Congress are on board with limiting our assistance to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in their war against Yemen. The problem at this moment is the Republican Party in Congress. And the biggest problem, of course, is the Republican president, Donald Trump, who then vetoed the resolution. And I'm not even going to try to predict why Trump did this. It might be because of the weapons sales that he is so proud of having approved on behalf of Boeing and Lockheed and Raytheon, those wonderful companies. It might be because his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has been WhatsApp buddies with the Saudi prince ever since Trump got elected. And I'm not being sarcastic here. That's true. It might be because the Saudis switched their hotel preferences from a hotel in Northern Virginia to the Trump International Hotel, which funneled at least $270,000 to the Trump Organization in just a couple months. Who knows why Trump does what he does? All we can know for sure is what he does, and he vetoed this resolution. The only way to make it law now is to force his hand by having more Republicans in Congress switch from no's to yeses and override Trump's veto. Which makes me want to share with you the debate that was had in this Congress over this resolution. Why are the people who are for it, and why are the people who are against it, against it? And so let's start with Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who voted for the resolution to limit our involvement in the Yemen war. This was in the Yemen war.
I'm appreciative that many of my colleagues are willing to stand up for this resolution today to end the war in Yemen. I wish that it weren't because of the death of one journalist, because there have been tens of thousands that have died inside Yemen, and their lives are just as important, just as worthwhile as Jamal Khashoggi's life was, as tragic as that was. But there is a connection between the two, which is why I actually argued that this resolution is, in some way, shape, or form, a response to the death of Jamal Khashoggi for those that are primarily concerned with that atrocity. And here's how I link the two. What the Saudis did for 2 weeks was lie to us, right? In the most bald-faced way possible. They told us that Jamal Khashoggi had left the consulate, that he got out of there alive, that they didn't know what happened, when, of course, they knew the entire time that they had killed him, that they had murdered him, they had dismembered his body. We now know that the Crown Prince had multiple contacts all throughout the day with the team of operatives that did it. And yet they thought that we were so dumb or so weak or some combination of the two that they could just lie to us about it. That was an eye-opener for a lot of people here who were long-term supporters of the Saudi relationship, because they knew that we had troubles. They knew that sometimes our interests didn't align, but they thought that the most important things that allies did with each other was tell the truth, especially when the truth was so easy to discover outside of your bilateral relationship. And then all of a sudden, the Saudis lied to us for 2 weeks, and then finally come around to telling the truth because everybody knew that they weren't. And so it made a lot of people here think, well, wait a second, maybe the Saudis haven't been telling us the truth about what they've been doing inside Yemen. Because a lot of my friends had been supporting the bombing campaign in Yemen. Why? Because the Saudis said, we're hitting these civilians by accident. Those water treatment plants that have been blowing up, we didn't mean to hit them. That cholera treatment facility inside the humanitarian compound, that was just a bomb that went into the wrong place. Or we thought there were some bad guys in it. Didn't turn out that there was. It turns out the Saudis weren't telling us the truth about what they were doing in Yemen. They were hitting civilian targets on purpose. They did have an intentional campaign of trying to create misery. I'm not saying every single one of those school buses or those hospitals or those churches or weddings was an attempt to kill civilians and civilians only. But we've been in that targeting center long enough to know that they have known for a long time what they have been doing. Hitting a lot of people who have nothing to do with the attacks against Saudi Arabia. Maybe if the Saudis were willing to lie to us about what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, they haven't been straight with us as to what's happening inside Yemen. Because if the United States is being used to intentionally hit civilians, then we are complicit in war crimes. And I hate to tell my colleagues, that is essentially what the United Nations found in their most recent report on the Saudi bombing campaign. They were careful about their words, but they came to the conclusion that it was likely that the Saudi conduct inside Yemen would amount to war crimes under international law. If it is likely that our ally is perpetuating war crimes in Saudi Arabia, then we cannot be a part of that. The United States cannot be part of a bombing campaign that probably is, intentionally making life miserable for the people inside of that country.
So to summarize, the Saudi royals are dicks and they're liars, and some in Congress don't want to help them anymore. But Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma, who voted against the resolution, sees things differently.
Saudi Arabia is an important Middle Eastern partner. Its stability is vital to the security of our regional allies and our partners, including Israel. And Saudi Arabia is essential to countering Iran. We all know that. We know how tenuous things are in that part of the world. We don't have that many friends. We can't afford to lose any of them.
Israel. Another pattern that I can't possibly avoid seeing in my journey towards understanding our role in the world is that so much of what we do is connected to protecting Israel and countering Iran. Like, what is this pathological thing they have about Iran? It's weird. Here's Chris Murphy again.
It's important to note something that we take for granted in the region. This is this now long-term détente that has existed between the Gulf states and Israel, something that did not used to be something that you could rely on. In fact, one of the most serious foreign policy debates that this Senate ever had was on the sale of AWACS to Saudi Arabia back in the 1980s. The objection then was that by empowering Saudi Arabia, you were hurting Israel and Israeli security. No one would make that argument today because Saudi Arabia has been a good partner in trying to figure out a way to calm the tensions in the region, and of course to try to provide some balance in the region, with the Iranian regime on the other side continuing to this day to use inflammatory and dangerous rhetoric about the future of Israel. And so this is an important partnership, and I have no interest in blowing it up. I have no interest in walking away from it. But you are not obligated to follow your friend into every misadventure they propose. When your buddy jumps into a pool of man-eating sharks, you don't have to jump with him. There is a point at which you say enough is enough.
So Iran is a bad guy because the Iranian regime, I guess, says mean things about Israel. Okay. The Saudi Arabian royals are good guys, even though their government was involved in 9/11. You know, Saudi Arabia is involved in 9/11. They're indiscriminately bombing civilians. They have a society that is not at all mirroring ours. There's no democracy there. It's run by the Saudi royal family and has been for like forever. So why are we this close with Saudi Arabia? You know, just 9/11 alone. I can't get over that. Those 28 missing pages when we finally got them from the 9/11 report, it said that Saudi intelligence officers were involved. Osama fucking bin Laden, a Saudi royal. You know, like what is this? But anyway, apparently it's a bipartisan agreement that we have to stay friends with Saudi Arabia. Just maybe we don't participate in this Yemen thing. We participate in everything else they do for Israel's sake. And Chris Murphy, for his part in this, he's not too worried about saying enough is enough, at least on Yemen, to Saudi Arabia.
There is no relationship in which we are the junior partner, certainly not with Saudi Arabia. And if Saudi Arabia can push us around like they have over the course of the last several years, and in particular the last several months, then it sends a signal to lots of other countries that they can do the same thing. That they can murder U.S. residents and suffer almost no consequences. That they can bomb civilians with our munitions and suffer no consequences. This is not just a message about the Saudi relationship. This is a message about how the United States is going to interact with lots of other junior partners around the world as well. Saudi Arabia needs us a lot more than we need them. And we need to remind folks of that over and over and over again. Spare me this nonsense that they're going to go start buying Russian jets or Chinese military hardware. If you think that those countries can protect you better than the United States, take a chance. You think the Saudis are going to really stop selling oil to the United States? You think that they're going to walk away from their primary breadwinner just because we say that we don't want to be engaged in this particular military campaign? I'm willing to take that chance. We're the major partner in this relationship, and it's time that we start acting like it. And if this administration isn't going to act like it, then this Congress has to act like it.
Once again, there's fossil fuels. The Saudis sell us oil, and we need their oil, although not so much anymore. That is one factor that we really haven't looked at yet, which is the fossil fuels. You know, I've played in other episodes that the world energy outlook is that we are soon going to be the #1 fossil fuel producer in the world. And to the point that we're selling it all over the world. It used to be that all of our fossil fuels had to stay here in the United States. And then that got dingleberried away a couple of years ago. And so now they're, fracking our land and poisoning us and taking our fossil fuels and selling it. The multinationals are around the world. And so we're the #1 exporter, which means we don't really need the Saudis anymore. We needed their oil for a really long time. That need is no longer there, which also could explain why all of a sudden people in both parties are like, maybe we don't need to be as loyal to the Saudis as we used to be, which honestly, fine by me. Getting off oil entirely, fine by me. And stop partnering with the Saudis, fine by me. These are not good people. And so that was one line of debate. Another line of debate, honestly, it took me by surprise. Here's Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma again.
The Sanders-Lee resolution is, I think, fundamentally flawed because it presumes that we are engaged in military action in Yemen. We're not. We're not engaged in military action in Yemen. There's been a lot of discussion about refueling. I don't see any stretch of the definition that would say that is it falls into that category.
Wait. We're not engaged in military action in Yemen? What in God's name are you talking about? We've heard the Defense Department talk about how we are engaged in this. Like what? And it wasn't just Inhofe saying this, This was said by multiple people, just not as bluntly as Jim Inhofe. And so I'm baffled. I'm baffled that he could even say this. And this line of thought also baffled Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who, thank God, got up there. And, you know, he's one of the 7 Republicans who voted for the resolution. So he is a Republican responding to a Republican. And this is what he said.
Many of my colleagues will argue, and in fact, some of them have argued just within the last few minutes, that we're somehow not involved in a war in Yemen. My distinguished friend and colleague, the senator from Oklahoma, came to the floor a little while ago, and he said, we are not engaged in direct military action in Yemen. Let's peel that back for a minute. Let's figure out what that means. I'm not sure what the distinction between direct and indirect is here, maybe in a very technical sense, or under a definition of warfare or military action that's long since been rendered outdated. We're not involved in that, but we are involved in a war. We're co-belligerents. The minute we start identifying targets, or as Secretary James Madison put it about a year ago in December of 2017, the minute we're involved in the decisions involving making sure that they know the right stuff to hit, that's involvement in a war. And that's pretty direct. The minute we send up U.S. military aircraft to provide mid-air refueling assistance for Saudi jets en route to bombing missions, to combat missions on the ground in Yemen, that is our direct involvement in war.
And on top of that, let's not forget that we have been constantly bombing Yemen since the W. Bush years. In January 2019, just 3 months ago, the U.S. Central Command confirmed that the Trump administration bombed Yemen 36 times in 2018 and 131 times in 2017. There were 21 U.S. drone bombings in Yemen in 2016, the last year of the Obama administration. While both administrations have claimed that it's only the Saudis fighting in Yemen, we've been bombing that country the entire time. The United States, directly. Our planes, our commanders, our choices, our bombs, our taxes, us. Why do we excuse this? Because it's aimed at Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Those labels are slapped on people with no investigations, no arrests, no trials, often no crimes. It doesn't matter if the bombs are meant for Houthis or people labeled terrorists if it's your home destroyed or your family member blown up. The drone bombings count. We're bombing Yemen. The Saudi war is only one part of that. And even in that part, we're more involved than we've been told. Here's Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, a Democrat who voted for the resolution.
In March of this year, I led a letter to the Department of Defense with my colleague, Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, along with many of our colleagues on the Senate Armed Services Committee, stating our concern regarding U.S. support for Saudi military operations against the Houthis in Yemen, and asking about the DOD's involvement, apparently without appropriate notification of Congress in its agreements to provide refueling support to the Saudis and the Saudi coalition partners. We were concerned that the DOD had not appropriately documented reimbursements for aerial refueling support provided by the United States. 8 months later, just days ago, the Department of Defense responded to our letter and admitted that it has failed to appropriately notify Congress of its support agreements. It has failed to adequately charge Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates for fuel and refueling assistance. That admission, 8 months after our inquiry, is a damning indictment. These errors in accounting mean that the United States was directly funding the Saudi war in Yemen. It has been doing it since March of 2015.
So a portion of the taxes that you have paid every year since 2015 has directly funded the Saudi bombing of Yemen. This has been confirmed by a sitting senator. The Obama and Trump Defense Departments weren't just helping with the war. They've been using our money to directly fund it. So don't fucking tell me we aren't involved. You know, the spin with these people, it still stuns me even after all these years. Anyway, there were other concerns expressed by those that voted against the resolution and for continuing our involvement in bombing and starving Yemen. This is now retired Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee during his last month in Congress, free to speak his mind with no fear of re-election.
What this may mean is we set a precedent about refueling and intelligence activities being considered hostilities. I'm concerned about that. And I think the senator knows that we have operations throughout northern Africa where we're working with other governments on intelligence to counter terrorism. And we're doing refueling activities in northern Africa now. And it concerns me, he knows I have concerns, that if we use this vehicle, then we may have 30 or 40 instances where this vehicle might be used to do something that really should not be dealt with by the War Powers Act.
30 or 40 instances? What are we doing in northern Africa? Whose planes are we refueling? These are real questions. I have no idea. That's a rabbit hole far too deep for me today. But what the And that might be a low estimate, according to Representative Michael McCall of Texas, who was chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee until the Democrats took over just a few months ago, and who currently also sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So this guy knows things. And here's what he said during the House debate.
This resolution stretches the definition of war powers hostilities to cover non-U.S. military operations by other countries. Specifically, it reinterprets U.S. support to these countries as, quote, engagement in hostilities, end of quote. This radical reinterpretation has implications far beyond Saudi Arabia. This precedent will empower any single member to use privileged war powers procedures to force congressional referendums that could disrupt U.S. security cooperation agreements with more than 100 countries around the world.
We have security cooperation agreements with more than 100 countries? That's more than half the countries in the world. Now do you see why some people who know things refer to us as an empire? It's because we're everywhere. And those of us who are paying for all this don't have any idea what the extent of this is. I'm constantly being surprised. And here we go again. Which is why I'm actually happy to see that finally Congress is pushing back, even a little bit with this resolution. Even with its big fat, you can still bomb humans you think are Al-Qaeda loophole. You know, so far, I've never seen anything rolling back a war move this far through Congress. Not since I started this podcast in 2012. And have I mentioned that the guy who wrote the resolution that made it all the way through Congress, one of the only two independents in Congress, is running for president?
And an issue that has been of long concern to many of us, conservatives and progressives, is that this war has not been authorized by Congress and is therefore unconstitutional. Article 1 of the Constitution clearly states that it is Congress, not the president, that has the power to send our men and women into war. Congress, not the president. The framers of our Constitution, the founders of this country, gave the power to declare war to Congress, the branch most accountable to the people, not to the president, who is often isolated from the reality of what is taking place in our communities. But the truth is, and Democratic and Republican presidents are responsible, and Democratic and Republican Congresses are responsible, and that is that for many years, Congress has not exercised its constitutional responsibility over whether or not our young men and women go off to war. And I think there is growing sentiment all over this country from Republicans, from Democrats, from independents, from progressives, from conservatives, that the time is now, that Congress cannot continue to abdicate its constitutional responsibility.
Amen. And so that's the gist of the debate. But there's really only one argument that matters more than anything, and that was made by Representative Ro Khanna of California, who wrote a similar resolution in the House.
My motivation for
This bill is very simple. I don't want to see 14 million Yemenis starve to death. That's what Martin Griffiths had said at the UN, that if the Saudis don't stop their blockade and let food and medicine in, within 6 months, we will see one of the great humanitarian crises in the world.
Our actions, the Saudi actions, the United Arab Emirates actions, are hurting people. And yes, of course, the Houthis who have child soldiers and plant landmines, they're hurting people too. But Senator Todd Young, another one of the 7 Republican senators to vote for the resolution, made the best point of all.
But we don't have much leverage over the Houthis. We have significant leverage over the Saudis, and we must utilize it.
Which is true. We have power over the Saudis, not the Houthis. That's the side we can force to simmer down. But we also need to take a long, hard look at the war on terror, too. It's been 18 years of bombing, 17 of those in Yemen. And we can't blame the Saudis for those. That's us. And here's the effect that it's having. This testimony summary that I stitched together is from a 2013 hearing in the Senate, and the witness will introduce himself.
My name, as you mentioned, is Farah al-Muslimi, and I am from Musab, a remote village mountain in Yemen. I spent a year living with an American family and attended an American high school. That was one of the best years of my life. I learned about American culture, managed the school basketball team, and participated in a trick or treat in Halloween. But the most exceptional experience was coming to know someone who ended up being like a father to me. He was a member of the U.S. Air Force. Most of my year was spent with him and his family. He came to the mosque with me, and I went to church with him, and he became my best friend in America. I went to the U.S. as an ambassador for Yemen, and I came back to Yemen as an ambassador of the U.S. I could never have imagined that the same hand that changed my life and took it from miserable to promising one would also drown my village. My understanding is that a man named Hamid al-Radami was the target of a drone strike. Many people in Wisab know al-Radami, and the Yemeni government could easily have found and arrested him. Al-Radami was well-known to government officials and even to local government, and even local government could have captured him if the U.S. had told them to do so. In the past, what Wisab's villagers knew of the U.S. was based on my stories about my wonderful experiences here. The friendships and values I experienced and described to the villagers helped them understand the America that I know and that I love. Now, however, when they think of America, they think of the terror they feel from the drones that hover over their heads, ready to fire missiles at any time. What a violent militants had previously failed to achieve, one drone strike accomplished in an instant.
And the degree of separation on this between our community and Faraz's community is not as distant as you might think. One of the catalysts for this episode has been emails that have been breaking my heart, which have been sent to me by a member of our Congressional Dish community. And I'm not going to air any names because who knows what can put people in danger. But our community member took in an exchange student from Yemen. And as many of you know, I was an exchange student in Germany, and I can testify that when you live with a family, you often become family. And that's precisely what happened to them. And our Yemenis family is in danger. One of the family members has gotten asylum in Canada, but most of the family is still stuck in the capital of Yemen, in Sana'a. One of their communications to me, sent from one of the brothers inside Yemen, the only one in the family who still has a job, has been stuck in my head since I read it in February. He said, quote, "At first it was really hard for all, especially bombing everywhere. Blockade is the biggest crime, even bigger than bombing. They make people starve to death. We are lucky that one of the family members still has a job, which is me. But many people lost their jobs and had nowhere to go and nothing to eat. The infrastructure is severely damaged. But after all, God finds us a way to adapt to whatever happens here. We also don't get it when we think about how long we have to live this war. How many crises we get through during the last 4 years, yet we are still alive." Unquote. But for how much longer? You know, that's the scary thing. They've been in harm's way for 4 years. How much longer do they have to live like this? You know, as I sit here, I feel no danger at all of bombs possibly falling on me from the sky. But I can imagine what that would be like. You know, I live right by an international airport. I listen to planes all day long. And the thing is that noise doesn't scare me because they're not armed. But what if I heard that noise all day long and they were? And that's the reality for people right now, for people just like you and I, for family members of the Congressional Dish community. The only difference is that they were born on a different piece of land, but they're just like you and I. And our country has the leverage and the power to make it stop. And unlike so many hopeless causes of the past, a majority of Congress is already willing to take steps in that direction. This one's not hopeless, but it's going to take pressure from us applied towards the Republican Party. 7 Republican senators and 16 Republican House members are already on the right side, the side of peace. The division here isn't completely on party lines. The most fascinating parts of the debate, as you heard, were the conversations between Republicans. And so if we pressure Republicans, especially the ones in the Senate who are up for re-election in 2020, the tide can be turned on this. Trump can be overruled. And I think it would be good for everyone for a sitting president, especially this one, to be put in check by a co-equal branch of government, especially in a matter of war. And so since I've committed to using this podcast, not just to document all the shady things happening in our government, but to also suggest solutions, I suggest that if you give a shit about our fellow peasant brothers and sisters, if you give a shit about our community in Yemen, I suggest you contact your Republican members of Congress. I suggest you show up at their offices. I suggest you badger them until they override Trump's veto, because they're the ones preserving President Trump's ability to continue to help the Saudis hurt our friends and family in Yemen. Republicans have the power to stop this. The Democrats in Congress are 100% already on board. And you have the power to pressure Republicans. The only question now is if you will choose to use it. All right. So I have to admit defeat on a project that I've been working on for 6 months. It has become entirely too clear to me that I am completely unqualified to set up and administer the Congressional Dish Green Room. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, for the last 6 months, I've been promising that by the end of this month, and then by the end of this month, and then by the end of this month, I swear. But I've been saying this now for 6 months in a row that I'm going to have a private feed set up for financial contributors, all financial contributors, not just the ones contributing on Patreon. Now, the private feed that has existed for, I think, about 15 or 20 episodes now on Patreon has a version of every episode without the golf swing. The golf swing, I'm sure you've heard it like 20 times in this episode. But the reason that I do that is that there are countries such as China and India that have literally billions of people that don't allow podcasts into their Apple store that have explicit content. And so for the main feed, I take out, I don't want to actually censor myself. I want to say whatever comes to my mind in the moment, which is why my compromise on that is I golf swing all of my And so that's why I do that. But a lot of people want to hear me actually say those words. And so if you want to get the feed without the golf swing, all you have to do is contribute right now on Patreon and you get those episodes. But I also want to give you bonus episodes that are not polished and that are created in the process of creating the main episodes. Like, for example, husband Joe wants to watch the Michael Cohen hearing, and I want to read the Mueller report and watch that hearing with him now that we have more context for Michael Cohen's testimony. And I'd love to invite everyone on this Congressional Dish team here to watch it with us, and I will do that. But the problem is that right now, we only have the extra feed on Patreon. And there are a lot of people who contribute to the show with checks and Zelle and PayPal and Venmo and the Cash App. And I want to give everyone that contributes to this podcast access to that. And so my idea was to set up a private feed that I control who has the access to. And podcasting just hasn't technologically progressed to the point that that's as easy as it should be. It doesn't seem like that should be that hard. And so back in November, after looking for, honestly, 2 years for a solution, I had gone to Podcast Movement last year and I found out about a service called Digital Access Pass. And this will work. I know that this will work. And it'll work using a WordPress site, which is the only kind of website that I know anything about. So it's perfect, right? And so back in November, I scheduled a day with a friend who's designed websites to help me to get this all set up. And it became clear very quickly, in about like 20 minutes, that this was too much for us to handle. And so then I paid the company to help me set it up. And back in January, we did set up about half of it. We got to the point that the website was up and running and the program was installed, and we had a system in place within the website that allowed me to upload the bonus shows. But what we still had to do was get it to the point where we could have you, the person helping me keep the show going. We needed to get you into the system. And then on my end, I had to figure out how to get the feed into the podcast apps so that I could give you instructions. And so this is what I sat down to do since the last episode. I was going to finish this process. And so I went to the Green Room's website and it was gone. And so the long, horribly frustrating story, the short version, is that Digital Access Pass, which is what I'm using to set up the private feed, it broke the website. And it took 3 days for me to figure that out. And it turns out that because I hadn't signed on to the Green Room in a while, something wasn't compatible with an update or some I don't know. But the Digital Access Pass people went into my website and they fixed it. Fantastic. Then I signed on, worked on the website for 5 minutes, and it broke again. And so I told the Digital Access Pass people this, who sent me back instructions that might as well have been written in Japanese. And the thing is, could I teach myself the Japanese and figure it out? Probably. But the problem is that I hate every fucking second that I spend working on the websites. And so instead of learning the Japanese and taking a whole day to do this, I said, fuck this website, fuck this computer, fuck this private feed, WordPress, fuck you, fuck me, fuck everyone and everything. I'm over this. Fuck it, I'm out. And then I laid on my office couch and cried for probably a solid hour. It was not my finest moment. And so in that state, I called my dad, which I always do when I know I'm behaving like a really old baby. And I told him about this, and he advised me that I was setting myself up for a world of frustration with this project because I was never taught how to design or operate websites. And unlike with podcasting and learning how to navigate congressional archives and other weird things that I've taught myself to do, I have no interest in learning anything about websites. I hate every single second of it. Even the simplest things when it comes to the website take me hours that I'm not spending, researching Yemen. And so he advised me that it was actually the smart way to go. And so I emailed the Digital Access Pass people and told them, thanks for all your help, but I'm out. I'm not qualified for this. And my solution was just going to be to keep the private feed on Patreon, and that's it. What else could I do? And this is where I have to sing the praises of the customer service at Digital Access Pass. Because here they had me, a customer that had paid them hundreds and hundreds of dollars 6 months ago. Money back guarantee window has long been closed. And instead of just taking my money and letting me quit, they sent me a long message promising me that they could make this work. They said they've done this for over 50 people and that they would be there for me and they will help me make it work. And I 100% believe them. They have been so responsive this entire time. And I have no doubt that these people are capable of getting the Green Room to work and that they actually want to. The customer service with the Digital Access Pass has been phenomenal. It really has. And it's because of that they talked me out of quitting this project. Because of Digital Access Pass, the Green Room is not actually dead. However, I know that I can't be the person who's in charge of this. I can't be the person who deals with the inevitable troubleshooting that will have to happen when this goes live. And it's not just the website side. I have an iPhone 5 and I use Apple Podcasts to listen to podcasts. That's the only app I use. And so if you have an iPhone that's newer than an iPhone 5, or God forbid you use an Android or any other podcast app other than Apple Podcasts to listen to your podcasts, I can't help you get this feed to work on your phone. And so that's just not going to work for any of us. I don't know what I'm doing with the website and I don't know what I'm doing with the phones. How am I the one in charge of this? It's not going to work, And like I said, it's not just the Green Room. I also hate working on the Congressional Dish website more than I hate spiders and blisters and the bathrooms at Raider Stadium. In fact, I would rather hang out in a Raider Stadium bathroom stall with a black widow spider with a blister on my ass than have to spend any time at all working with HTML. And so, since that's our reality here, here's my solution. I am going to hire someone whose job it will be to maintain the Congressional Dish websites, and that person will get the Green Room up and running. And figure out all of the technical problems that are going to appear because of it. And so that affects you in two ways. Number one, if you want the private feed with the golf swing free version of every episode and, whatever extra shit I put back there, the easiest way to get that for the next few months remains to contribute on Patreon. $1 an episode is all that you have to pledge to get that. And that said, if you're a Patreon hater, I did figure out a hack to get you those episodes. So basically, Lauren and I have figured out a way to email you the location of a website for each episode of bonus content, and you can download each of those episodes manually from there. That's the best we can do for the Patreon haters for now. And two, this means that there is, and if you're someone who wants that, we can't remember who you are, so please email Lauren at congressionaldish.com and she will hook you up with those episodes. And two, this also means that there is a job opening coming soon, very soon, here at Congressional Dish. And this is not a volunteer position, because when it comes to volunteers, I don't feel comfortable telling a volunteer like, hey, I need you to do this right this second. And so I want to pay someone who is on call to deal with whatever website shit comes up. Now, the ideal candidate for this job who wants to be on board with this mission and this project, and who I ideally want someone who knows Congressional Dish. But the ideal candidate is someone who definitely has experience in podcasting, preferably with Libsyn. I want someone who knows WordPress, and anyone who has experience with Digital Access Pass will have their application moved to the top of the pile. And so in the next few weeks, I'm going to be creating a detailed job description, and I will let you know when that's available. And then we'll start collecting resumes, and then my dad is actually going to do the hiring. And the thing is that I'm looking for a long-term team member here. I've been working with Pro Podcast Solutions for 3 years, 4 years. I don't even know how long. And that's the type of relationship that I want to have with the person who's in charge of my website. The website is an extremely important thing when it comes to Congressional Dish. And so we really want to do this right. And so if you think that you're the right candidate, hold off on contacting me for now, but get your resume ready and be prepared to tell me your experience with those 3 key things: podcasting, WordPress, and Digital Access Pass. Although I know that is not a program many people have heard of. It's really podcasting and WordPress. And if you can look at Digital Access Pass and feel comfortable using it, then you're definitely in the running. And for everybody else who isn't interested in that job, I am really sorry for jerking you around on this. I've been promising something that I couldn't deliver, and I do feel terrible about that. But even the thought, honestly, of having a technical support person on my team has brought me so much happiness. So I think this is just what it took for me to get that clarity and to realize that it's worth spending a portion of my income to make that task disappear from my list. And so in the long term, even though I've jerked you around for 6 months, I do think this will end up being better for all of us. But obviously, to make this happen, to hire someone with experience in podcasting and web design who's up for creating a new thing in podcasting that doesn't really exist yet, that's going to cost money. And as we seem to have happen every single year in mid-April, we have experienced the tax day cancellation wave. And this year, I am taking it less personally because, like I said, it happens every year. But quite a few people dropped their support for the podcast right around April 15th. And I always find that kind of ironic that the act of paying taxes causes people to drop their support for a podcast that aims to tell you what's being done with your tax money. Like, of all things to drop because of taxes. It's just funny that Congressional Dish makes that cut, but it is what it is. And I get it, writing a big fat check causes me to financially panic too. I feel the panic too on April 15th. Let me tell you. There's no paychecks coming into me where I have it just disappear and I don't think about it. And when it comes to tax time, I actually write the big fucking check. So I feel it and I get it. And to those of you who supported the podcast and had to stop, I'm not mad at you. But the point is that we did lose a significant amount of support. It adds up to well over $100 a month. So it's a lot. And so this would be a great time to pay for the episodes you've gotten value from if you haven't already. I mean, the value for this episode alone, I think, is pretty significant. You just heard a summary of 6.5 years of information collection. But plus, for this specific episode, I read the Yemen resolution. I watched 5 congressional hearings going back 8 years. I watched an hour-long press conference. I watched a bunch of news segments. I read and grabbed clips from 3 days worth of debate from the House and Senate floor. And I did all the research on top of that to put this story together. And that's a lot of boring stuff that you didn't have to slog through, but I did. And I summarized all of it for you in, an hour and a half? I don't know. Pro Podcast Solutions right now is editing the main show as I record this. But on top of that, I also made sure to document all of the timestamps of the clips, and I created transcripts for you, and I made a list of all the articles and documents that I used, and I gave you all of those in the show notes, which takes a lot of time. And I have to ask, how many other podcasts bother to do that for you? I had a conversation with some other podcasters the other day, and their attitude is, well, our audience is smart enough to do their own research if they want to fact check us. Well, I think my audience is smart too. In fact, I know you're smart, but I also know you're busy. If you weren't busy, then this podcast wouldn't be necessary. You would know this stuff already because you would have hours and hours and hours to do this research. But you don't. And so I'm not going to tell you something and then say, well, if you don't believe me, dig through 8 years of congressional hearings. You'll eventually find out I'm right. No, no. It's definitely extra work for me to do those show notes, but that's where the value comes from. I do the work and you pay for it. It's the same deal you have with waiters and bartenders and landscapers and anyone who performs services for you. The only difference here is that we operate on the honor system. You absolutely have the power to take my work for free and never pay me for it. And sadly, a lot of people do. But luckily, there are also some people who value what this podcast gives them and value its existence and independence. And so if you're one of them, please contribute to the podcast whatever you think is fair. All of the options are listed for you right on the front page, actually, on congressionaldish.com. If you want to make sure that we get every cent of your payment, you can send checks to our address in Florida, or you could use Zelle or Venmo. To easily send digital payments, PayPal or the Cash App are super easy. And again, if you want the golf swing free versions of the last 15 or so episodes and all future episodes, contribute on Patreon. And we also have merchandise available in the Congressional Dish store. And go in that store and play around because the shirts are totally customizable. You can get them in like a dozen different colors, and there's different styles. There's different fabrics that you can get them in. There's even different products. We have reusable bags and stickers and pillows, and there's so much stuff. So go in the store and play around. Don't just look at the front page. You can get really whatever you want. And then the way you want to do that, look at the design. If you want a pocket logo, so if you want to say Congressional Dish small, where your pocket would be on your chest, look for that. Or if you want it big and on your back, look for that. And then customize it with colors and fabrics and styles. And that's how you want to go about the store. But that's a great way to support the show because in addition to kicking us some cash with your purchase, you'll also be helping us to market the show because I have decided that I'm not going to do any marketing anymore. I'm not good at it. The show wasn't growing when I was trying to get out there and get on other podcasts and whore myself out to the comedians and the cool people. No, my time should be spent in the congressional record and watching hearings, and this is what I should be doing. And so I am going to go back to depending 100% on you to be the marketing department for Congressional Dish. I need you to tell your friends and family to listen to this podcast because that's how this show grew in the first place. And my time is better spent on making the product. Your time is better spent telling people that you like it. Because how many people could I possibly get to listen to the podcast? This is easier done when the thousands of people that listen to it, if we each tell one person to listen to it, then it grows so much faster. So that's a job better delegated to you. So yeah, I need your help. And so please help Congressional Dish combat the tax day cancellation wave. It would be very much appreciated. All right, fans of Joe Briney. Joe Briney is back to do the thank yous with me today because it's Saturday morning and I haven't seen this handsome feller all week. So in order to hang out with him and get my work done at the same time, we're doing this on the couch.
I know you're putting me to work for the first time we've hung out in a while.
I know. I'm an asshole.
True.
And I didn't actually make you turn off golf, but I appreciate that you did.
I didn't want to be distracted.
Well, how distracting can it be? It's so incredibly slow and boring. I'm not too worried about it, which is why I didn't make you turn it off.
It's perfect for a nice leisurely Saturday afternoon where I'm not working.
It's perfect for a day where you want to feel like you're in a coma. That is absolutely true.
That's my goal for today.
Well, you're on your way, which is nice. And this won't take very long because we did not get very many contributions since the last episode. So for you, I guess, where you want to get back to being horribly bored watching golf, this will be good for you. But for the podcast, not so good. Not so good. But, okay, so let's get started with thanking the people who did contribute, who really made a huge difference this month because, like I said, it's tax month and we always lose a lot of money in tax month. So
when you're saying your contributions are way down, is that less new subscribers or is that just like less total?
All of the above. We had a major cancellation wave. Major. One of the reasons is that we lost a pretty hefty contributor, and it's fine. And I actually really support the reason that this one person decided to pull their funding, because this was someone that's working in the financial industry, and it was damaging their soul and they were miserable. And so they're cutting back on their expenses so that they can find something that makes them happier. So it's like, I'm 100% on board with that mission. And like, I wish you well. And I know that you will be back, and like, no hard feelings. I'm like, you go, my friend, like, that's fine. But it definitely hurts the podcast. And then we had a bunch of other people drop their subscriptions too, in addition to just like not getting as much money as we usually do. And I actually kind of already said this when I recorded an earlier part of the episode, but I'm not as concerned about this as I've been in years past because there's a pattern. It's tax day. Every April this happens. No matter what I do, no matter how good the episodes are, every April people pay taxes and they freak the fuck out and they stop supporting the podcast. And like, it fits the pattern, so I'm not freaking out, but we do need it to pick back up. So yes, we're taking a financial hit for sure in April.
So it wasn't like you had a really unpopular episode or you were extraordinarily offensive.
No. I mean, the last 2 weeks have definitely been unpleasant with the anti-vaxxer bullshit that I've dealt with. But I knew that was coming. And actually, a lot of the people have been pretty cool about it, where they're just like, we don't want mandatory vaccinations. And it's like, well, neither do I. Like, medical exemptions are a thing in every state and still will be. And it's conversations like that where there's been a lot of extremes that have been expressed, or people are like, vaccines are dangerous. And it's like, okay. Or vaccines haven't been studied as much as they should. And all drugs shouldn't be studied, quickly and then approved. And it's like, hold up. My episode was about the measles one, which has been around for decades. Like, we're not talking about all vaccines. Like, I understand that the process of how drugs are approved in this country is fucked on a lot of levels. And if there was a new vaccine that came out tomorrow and all of us had to put it in our veins, I would be very concerned about it, But that's not what we were talking about in the last episode. It was about fucking measles. But it did bring these people out of the woodwork that are just like, vaccines! And so that's been annoying, but I don't know if that's why any of the contributions have gone down, because no one said so. I think it's tax day. I think that's the thing.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I mean, the last two episodes were about CFATs, which most people don't even know what that is, and chemical explosions and measles. Like, I didn't go too controversial. So, yeah.
I don't know. I'm pro chemical explosion.
I'm pro measles. I actually think it would be really fun to get the measles, because that way I could lay on this couch for a week and have a reason to do nothing.
It's a really deadly, debilitating thing, and it has like such a cute name.
I know, measles. That's the only reason I knew about it. Dar measle. I know, so stupid. But I didn't know that measles was still a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that people were still dying from it in other places, because it was just not something that I've ever worried about. And I can't say I'm all that worried about it now that I've looked into it. I'm worried for a few people that we know, like some new babies in our life, and a certain person who's been battling cancer now for a long time. Like, they're susceptible.
Yeah.
That's where my concern is. But for me, I'm probably fine. So, okay. So now let's thank the people that did contribute, because it was really important to contribute this time. So I would like to thank our highest contributor of the episode, which is Marco Lanotte. He contributed $300 from Castle Rock, Colorado. I actually have family in Castle Rock, Colorado. It's a nice place. And the email said, "Hi, Jen. I have been listening to your show for years. I first heard you on an episode of Talk Nerdy around 2015. Oh, I should call Kara. I haven't talked to her in a long time. I've wanted to donate many times, but never followed through and set up payments. Well, that ends today. Woohoo! I set up a monthly paper check donation through my bank, so you'll be receiving $4.20 a month, ding, in honor of my home state of Colorado and my love for the green." Aw, Marco, we should hang out.
That is your core audience right there.
It is funny how many people contribute $4.20 for precisely that reason, and I love every single one of you.
Where's Castle Rock?
I remember that it was like a Sesame Street away from Aurora, because when I was younger, when my parents would drive in Colorado, it was either a Full House or a Sesame Street. And so it was closer to a Sesame Street than a Full House. But that's really all I remember. But it was like not that far from Aurora.
Okay.
Yeah.
One Sesame Street.
One Sesame Street. Back to his note, he said, "I also sent a one-time payment of $300 to make up for all of my past freeloading. Thank you. I believe I started listening around episode 88, so that's almost $3 an episode. Although this is my first time writing in or contributing, I have been a faithful listener of the podcast for several years now. I have learned a great amount and always listen all the way to the end for any extra bits of info that might come out through the people's emails. Episode 186, and you know what? That is a reason to keep doing the long thank yous. People don't tell me that they like the thank you, so I just assume everyone doesn't listen because the stats, Apple now lets you see when people drop out. And it is very consistent that for every episode, most people disappear when I start doing the thank yous. But there are people that listen to them all the way through.
Yeah, and these people can drop out. I don't see what the big deal is.
Here's what the big deal is. There are other shows that are doing me a solid by putting me in their streams, right? So it's like if they have a feed or I don't know how all this tech works, but at some point, like there's a place where people can go and it's one podcast after another, right? My show, they want to put in it, but then I have this extra hour and a half of babbling at the end that they don't really want. So those are the opportunities that I'm missing by not cutting it down to just the meat. But yeah. I'm also lately just in this place where I'm trying to get back to where I was in 2012 when I started this. Like there's so much advice and things that I'm doing or not doing. And I've just been stressing myself out over this, as you know, and I'm just trying to get back to the basics. Like what was I doing when I started this and when I was happy? And it was C-SPAN all the time. You know, like that's what I really enjoy. I enjoy watching the hearings. I enjoy like reading the bills to figure out like what the hell they're talking about and what they're doing. Like that's what I enjoy. And so...
And you give me shit for watching golf.
Dude, you've watched these hearings. It's so much more entertaining than golf. Wait until you see Michael Cohen. It was really fun. You just need to watch more hearings that are... That's the thing. You have to know the backstory. And if you don't know the backstory, which is why I like doing Congressional Dish, if you know who the people are and you know the backstory, it's far more interesting than golf. Oh my God. Golf is so boring. Oh, let me stand here on this piece of grass and wiggle my ass and then, hit the ball. And then you're watching and it's like, where'd the fucking ball go? Don't know. It's really far away. Like, no. And every time they're going to hit it, they take forever. And then they kneel down and they put their club down to find the angle. And you sit there and you watch them do this over and over again for like a whole day.
It's relaxing.
Oh, I bet it is.
You can take a nap and like not really miss much.
Or you could take the nap. That's what I'd prefer to do.
I like options.
Well, I like hearings.
All right.
I'm learning far more than you are watching golf.
But I'm watching dudes wiggle their butt.
That would be fine if they weren't all fat.
They're not.
There's some fatty fats that play golf, and you know it. President Trump being the number one example.
I'm not watching Trump. I'm watching like professionals.
You know what? I got to tell you this much. If we could watch Trump play golf, I might actually be in. I actually think that would be fun.
I would totally watch that.
You would totally watch that because I've heard he's a cheater.
Yeah.
Which doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, no shit.
But I bet he's also one of those guys that throws his clubs.
Yes.
Right?
Probably at people. Or maybe even wildlife.
Yeah, I would totally watch Trump play golf. But it's not like watching football and baseball, where with a lot of the players, I am in it for the pants because they're tight fitting and they look really good. Like one of the reasons I got into watching men's sports is because I am vain and I like watching good-looking people. Golf? No. There's nothing there for me. So, I have nothing against fat people. I just don't want to watch them for 6 hours shimmy on a golf course. It's just not my thing. Why are we talking about any of this? Let's get back to Marco's email. He said, episode 186, the National Endowment for Democracy, and 187, Combating China, were, in my opinion, 2 of the best episodes you have ever produced. Those are 2 of my favorites, too. Those were also 2 of the hardest. But I'm also noticing that the people that really love the show, they really love the foreign policy stuff. I make more money when I do those. And in this episode, I found out that we have security agreements with over 100 different countries. Joe Briney, 100.
Wow.
I know. There's only 191 countries that exist. So it's like, what? I could be doing these foreign policy episodes forever. Like, I didn't know that we regime changed Yemen. I didn't know. How do I not know this?
Yeah.
Like, this is recent history. We're in a war there. It happened during the Obama administration. Like, how do we not know? So I just feel like this is a rabbit hole that, yeah, I mean, people like it when I go down these, and I do too, but those are really, really hard. But back to his note, he said, I love how you're able to dig deep on topics and just tell it like it is, even if it sounds crazy sometimes. Well, and that's why I'm so uncomfortable with some of these episodes, because I sound like a loon. Every time I have to talk about the World Trade System, I roll my eyes at myself. Like, I know what it sounds like, but what makes me feel better is when I feel loony, I go back and listen to my own episodes and I look at my own show notes and I go, no, this is real. This isn't coming from me. This is coming from John McCain and Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice and Joe Biden and the people that created the World Trade Organization and the World Bank and the whole fucking thing back after World War II. We have their sound clips. They talk about it openly all the time. I'm not crazy here. I know I'm not. But I sound crazy, you know, especially if you come into it in an episode like this. I tried to explain it in under 3 minutes, and I think I did. But it's tough because I'm building on work that I've been doing now for 6 years. So it's, yeah, I just feel like a Looney Tune. Do I sound like a Looney Tune to you when I talk about this stuff?
No, but I mean, like, a lot of it is surprising, and it's stuff that you don't normally hear, right? It's like, you just, especially during presidential election season, which seems to be all the time every year now, everyone just talks about how great the U.S. is all the time and how we just do things for the right reasons and for democracy around the world and all this stuff. And then you find out it's just like when we do stuff for, you know, our country's interests or our security interests, it's just sort of like, yeah, we're taking people over.
Yeah. And it's not really for our interests, is it?
No.
It's for these companies and for Israel a lot. I need to look more into that because it seems like we do a lot for Israel. And, you know, it's crazy when you say that about like how we do it all for democracy and even in this episode, I didn't mention it in the episode. There were a lot of things I just had to let go because this was such a heavy episode. But the guy that we installed basically in Yemen, President Hadi, when he was first elected, he was the only person allowed to be on the ballot, right? And that was in 2012, February. And he was supposed to have another election, like a real one with other candidates allowed 2 years later in February 2014. And they just never did that. Okay. So then I'm watching these hearings and there is a congresswoman while she's describing what happened. I made a montage to explain, you know, I basically let the members of Congress tell you what went down when the regime change went to shit. But this one lady goes, and the democratically elected president, and I just sat there and went, bitch, he was the only one on the ballot. And then he canceled all future elections and he's democratically elected. And it's like, if I can find this out, so can she, you know, like, yeah, just the spin on this. But because he's our guy, anything goes. And he's the same dude that, like, what's our goal? Saudi Arabia and us and the United Arab Emirates, like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to install him back into power. He was never actually democratically elected. And we're trying to put this dude back in. Like, the hypocrisy, I don't know why I find it so funny every time, but I do. It's just amazing. And we don't know any of it.
Yeah.
We don't know any of it. Oh, and another thing I did in this episode is I shat all over Joe Biden for all of the World Trade System reasons that he is horrible and I will never vote for him. I wanted to say that right now since he declared that he wants to be president within the last 48 hours. And this morning, as I was uploading the stuff for Mike, I went onto Twitter and there's Joe Biden talking about how weed is a gateway drug. Like, I don't think I have to worry too much about Joe Biden. I don't think he's going to be the nominee. It can't happen, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. But I don't know.
I don't
You
know.
never know.
I know. They really pushed Hillary. They might rig it for Biden, too. I don't trust the DNC. But, yeah, gateway drug. Like, shut up, Joe. All right. Back to the note. He said, keep doing the great work you have been, even when it gets tough. Sincerely, Marco Lanote. Oh, and he told me at the end how to say his name. So my last name is hard to say. Lanote. Just try and pretend you're Italian and talk with your hands and you might get it right. Marco Lanote.
I like it.
That was really fun to do. Guys, if you're going to give me pronunciation help, do it in the beginning of your emails because I fucked up your name a few times before I got the help, but I do appreciate it. Oh, and I could have used some pronunciation help with this episode because even the members of Congress, like Hillary said one president's one way, she called him President Saleh, but then in so many other instances, it was President Salah. Like, I don't know. And then I had to pronounce some Middle Eastern names. With President Hadi, I looked at the paper and I just went like, I don't know. And so I just called him President Hadi. I cheated. But I'm so basic when it comes to pronunciation. It's the hardest part of this job. It really is. I'd rather deal with the congressional record for days than have to pronounce people's names. See what I'm talking about?
You're terrible at this.
And that chocolate I had for breakfast was just straight chocolate. It wasn't even tainted by any kind of weed. Like, this is just how much trouble I have with speaking. Let's see. We got one raise. Only one this time, but I'll take it. We got a raise from Jody, and this is a check for now $8 a month. And this is a raise from $6 to $8. So thank you very much, Jody.
Woohoo.
We also have some new subscriptions. Oh my God, Joe, you're going to know this name. $20 a month is now being contributed by Kristen Cadena.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen.
That's amazing. Kristen. That's funny. I've been emailing her back and forth about, we're going to Cabo San Lucas next week, and she wanted me to set up her transportation, but she's not on our flight. And so, yeah, I've been like emailing her back and forth, but I didn't see this till now, so I like never thanked her or anything. She must be like, what a bitch.
I'll let you buy her a drink in Mexico.
Yeah. Except we're going to an all-inclusive.
That's the joke. Thank you.
Ah, got it. You're funny, Joe Bryans. Thanks, Kristen. Love you. I'll give you a hug on Thursday. We also are now getting $5 an episode on Patreon from each of these people. So Kristen Kiernan, Sandra Dunbar, Resolute Trial, and Dana Meyer. So thank you to all of you. I appreciate your support. And now you can listen to the Golf Swing free feed. Woohoo! We also got some contributions, and of course, Mike Coverdale is on the list. I love Mike Coverdale, and he sent in 3 payments, one for $1, one for $1.94, and one for $27. So the $1, he was trying to get my attention on Venmo. Usually this would work, Mike, because a lot of times I do have the notifications on for Venmo, but I didn't when you did this because it was Easter weekend, so I turned off all work-related notifications. But here was his play. He sent in $1 and he said a ding for the dingleberries. And then he sent in $1.94 and he said the dollar dings were to get your attention. The $1.94 is for Congressional Dish 194. So I like that. He was like, hello, I'm doing this. So yeah, that will probably work if it's not a holiday weekend.
A couple of weeks ago when I was at a conference, I was telling my coworkers like what you do. And, you know, they're asking me about Congress and bills and stuff, and they're like, what do you call it when you attach something that's just like a lot of money and you attach it to a bill and it has nothing to do with the bill? And I'm like, I actually don't know what it's called, but Jen calls them dingleberries. Like, that was the only answer I
had. Well, that proves that this isn't that sophisticated of a podcast, is it? Did they at least laugh?
Yeah, they laughed, and I was like, I honestly can't think of the actual term.
What
is it? A rider? Or is
yes, it's a rider.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. But
Dingleberries is so much better.
It is. It's
That's hilarious. Oh, and Mike also gave us $27 and he said for synchronicity. So I like that. Because I think, he sent in an email. I think 27 is his favorite number.
Oh, okay.
Because I told people about my 326 thing with the birthday. And he knows that. So 27 is his number. And I like it. Thanks, Mike. And I'll respond to your emails. I have about 200 emails to get through. I know that you sent emails. But yeah, my inbox is the bane of my existence. And you guys know that already. I'd also like to thank David Breitman, who contributed $30 from Las Vegas, Nevada. And he said this was for Congressional Dish 188, 189, 190. And he said, ignorance is easy, truth is hard. Don't I know it?
Yep.
Thank you, David. We got $20 from Mac Cretella on Venmo. And he said, hi, Jen. Thanks for the episode on vaccines. So someone liked the vaccines episode. He said, as a lucky parent of 2 kids, my wife and I are astonished to find out how much bad information is out there about vaccine side effects. Almost more importantly, the social acceptance amongst parents today for people who choose willingly not to vaccinate their kids. We recently found out that one of our 401c3 parents, probably 501c3 parents groups in the Bay Area has decided not to allow people to discriminate based on whether kids have been vaccinated. In other words, we may have kids at play dates who have willingly not been vaccinated. That's ridiculous. This definitely creates a danger for my children, but the people who suffer the most from this ignorance and lack of herd mentality are immunosuppressed children who cannot be vaccinated. Exactly. The ones that can't for medical reasons. These kids are unfairly being exposed to diseases, and the people to blame are these anti-vaxxers. Don't be discouraged by any backlash you get from the ignorant degenerates that are arguing you on this episode. Honestly, the vast majority of the people who have contacted me have been friendly and are concerned with the idea of the government mandating that we inject anything into our veins, which is a concern I can understand. I can also understand being concerned that the government is lying to us. This is a side effect. It's not just like, oh, the anti-vaxxers. It's also a side effect of having a government that has so consistently lied to us, that we don't trust the things that I think we should trust. Like when it comes to the CDC and the measles vaccine, I am more inclined to trust them because they're not political appointees, like those people in those hearings. They're not. They've been there for many administrations. They're doctors. I tend to trust doctors. I have friends and people who are doctors. Like they're in it to help people. It's just a matter of who you trust. But when the government consistently lies to you, all I'm saying is that I can understand where these people are coming from. And the vast majority of the feedback came from people that did vaccinate their kids, but just wanted to say, like, we can't just trust vaccines in general. And I thought I kind of mitigated that in the episode by saying, like, this is only about the measles vaccine. Like, there are other vaccines that might show up in the future that we have to be careful of. Like, I'm not saying all vaccines. Like, that's a ridiculous statement to make. But yeah, there's a lot of generalizations in this debate, and most people were cool. There was one guy who was basically like, you're 100% wrong, and then straight up refused to give me any proof whatsoever. And so he was probably the most annoying one. But most people, it was an intelligent discussion. And I'm going to say there were maybe 3 or 4 people that were just straight up dicks and I blocked or ignored or whatever, which it's not that bad.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably as expected or even lower than expected.
It's lower than expected. I think when we talk about these anti-vaxxers, they're not that many of them. But I also, I understand why Mac would be concerned here in the Bay Area.
Well, yeah, there doesn't have to be that many of them.
That's the thing. It doesn't have to be that many. And if you just look at what's going on in Washington and Oregon, there is this cluster of hippies that are more into, oh, it's my free-spirited child. Like, I'm not going to put anything into them mandated by the government. Everyone else's children. Like, I'm so sick of this Bay Area shit. And so I think that's what's concerning him. And what he just said really does irritate me too, that you can't discriminate based on vaccination status. Like, you have to. If your child is someone who has an allergy that prevents them from getting a measles vaccine, you have to be able to say, oh no, your child can't come over because it's unvaccinated. Like, that's not discrimination based on something that is uncontrollable. It's not like race or gender or sex or skin color. Like when you're talking about discrimination based on a choice you made to make your child susceptible to this disease, that you have a choice.
Yeah.
You have a choice to get this kid vaccinated. You're choosing not to. But the person who has the kid with the allergy, there is no choice. You're taking that choice away from them. You're exposed. Like, that is infuriating. And that's some real Bay Area shit right there. Calling vaccinations like a discrimination issue. Fuck that. So, yeah. Max, I hear you. But back to his note, he said, don't be discouraged by any backlash you get from, we're not going to be mean to the anti-vaxxers. He said, Congressional Dish is a podcast that stands out because the information you bring to each episode is fact and evidence-based. The stance on vaccines is no different. Thanks again, Max. And that's what I tried to do. I looked real hard. The show notes for that episode are not that extensive because I looked for evidence that the measles vaccine causes autism. I didn't find it. I looked for credible evidence that the CDC was lying. I didn't find it. I can't put stuff in the show notes that doesn't exist. And then in the few instances, like this guy, Del Bigtree, like this is the person that everyone that was like, Jen, you need to listen to this person. It was Del Bigtree. He has this documentary on Netflix called Vaxxed. But the sources he used to make that documentary are beyond questionable. And then everyone was sending me this episode of another podcast. I listened to it, and more than once, I said no out loud while listening to it because he said something that was either such an extreme exaggeration or was a mischaracterization of what the CDC was doing, or a couple times was just straight up untrue. And I was like, okay, can't trust you as a source. He was the number one person. When like, oh, you need to listen to Del Bigtree. Oh, here's a source you might want to listen to. So it was people being like, hey, like this is the other side of it. This might help you, like da-da-da. And I was prepared to, like I said, I took 2 hours and I listened to this podcast to see if there was something there. I was going to look into it because if I'm wrong on this is important. I need to know. I listened to Del Bigtree. I do not trust Del Bigtree. So I listened. I did what you asked me to do. I looked into it. Nopesy dopesy. Like I trust him as much as I trust Fox News. So that's where I am on that guy. I'm sure he's nice, but no. So that's off my chest. We also got $20 from David Thorman on Venmo, who said, just listen to Congressional Dish 193, and it was really interesting. You shouldn't feel bad about not responding to all emails and messages. The fact that you have up until this point is pretty crazy. You've been doing a great job. Hope I can give more soon. Well, thank you, David. We also got $15 on Zelle from Stacy Tibbetts, who said, payday. Woohoo! Thanks, girl. We got $10 on Venmo from Kevin Troxel, who said, you are an inspiration. Thank you. Thank you very much. We got $10 on Zelle from Ty Merrick, who said, thank you. You're welcome. We got $10 on Venmo from Daniel Lamanna. Thank you, Daniel. We got $5.33 from Zelle on Jonathan Aldridge. Thank you, Jonathan. Michelle Molina, love you, girl. We got another $5 from her on Venmo. We got $5 on Venmo from Christian Stafford, who said this was for episode 194. Thank you. I really, when I do these thank yous, need to start having a list of my own episodes because, like, I can't tell you which one is which.
Yeah.
194 I know is the measles because I just did that one. But when you get back into the 80s, like, I have no idea. Yeah, I think I should probably have that like printed next to my desk or something. We also got $5 on Zelle from Claire Kuntz, who said, thank you so much for making Congressional Dish in all caps. So in all caps, thank you for supporting it. We also got $3 on Venmo from Deborah Malaman, who said, because I learned my state of Wisconsin allows parents to opt out of measles vaccines for religious and personal reasons. Yeah. And there is something in the show notes. I actually put it in there after the episode because I found it later. But in the show notes, there's a map of the entire United States, and it shows you, it's like little syringes. And so it shows you what exemptions you have. And so every single state allows medical exemptions, but then you can also look at your state and see if it allows personal or religious one. And it makes it, you can do it in 2 seconds. So that's in the show notes now for you too on episode 194. And then last, Bitcoin is back in the game.
Woo.
Nope, just lied. It's Litecoin, so that's a new one. But an anonymous friend contributed the equivalent of $2.50 in Litecoin. It's been a while since we got the digital currency, so thank you. But yeah, short list, which is why we were able to fuck around today. But could really use your support. And next episode, so for the next episode, it's gonna be out not on time. It'll be out sometime in mid-May because I am doing my annual trip to Mexico with a big group of our friends. And to bring to Mexico, I have printed out the entire Mueller report. So the next episode, I'm going to read the Mueller report just because I know Congress is not going to let this go. The Democrats in the House have done all kinds of subpoenas already, and this is going to be a congressional story. And so if it's going to be a part of my life now that we actually have answers, I want to know what the facts are. So I'm going to read the goddamn Mueller report. I'm bringing it to Mexico, and we're going to watch the Cohen hearing. Joe and I are. So now that I have some context, I'll watch it with Joe, and we'll make that a bonus episode of us just jabbering. It's going to be a long one. I mean, the hearing alone is going to be 5 hours. But we'll do some kind of mashup of the Mueller report, whatever I find in there that's interesting. Already, just now, I was walking by and I flipped through the table of contents. There's like a whole section on Eric Prince, who is the Blackwater guy. Yeah. So he's somehow in the Mueller report. Like, oh, hell yeah. So yeah, I'm really excited actually to read this. This is more entertainment for me than anything else. But I don't know exactly when I'm going to be able to finish all that. So that's going to be the next episode. And I'm going to need your help to get through that bitch. So yeah, support the podcast. We need you. I would like to thank Daryl, Karen, especially Mike at Pro Podcast Solutions, because it's almost noon Pacific time on a Saturday and I'm still not done with this episode. So thanks for putting up with me, guys. I'd like to thank Jess and Sarah, who do the show notes. I'd like to thank Brian, who does the artwork for every episode and maintains the Congressional Dish store. Lauren, you're the best, my darling, my sister, and my accountant. And of course, I would like to thank my dad, because he did our taxes. Thank God, because you and I don't know what to do.
No idea.
And I would like to thank you for hanging out with me on the podcast.
Oh, well, you're very welcome.
And for letting me do this for a living, because it's pretty fun, even though it's financially extremely inconsistent. But yeah, love you.
Love you too.
And I love everyone who listens to this podcast. And I will be back soon with the Mueller report. Dun, dun, dun. All right, that's a good spot to end. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. With the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.